My name is Tom, and I've been a park ranger at Black Ridge National Park for nearly a decade. I love my job, patrolling the trails, ensuring the safety of visitors, and protecting the natural beauty of the park. But the peace and tranquility of Black Ridge can sometimes be deceiving. The park holds secrets, and some of those secrets are dark and dangerous. It was late autumn, and the park was preparing for the winter season. The trees were shedding their leaves, covering the ground in a blanket of red and gold. The air was crisp and cool, and the park was quieter than usual, with fewer visitors venturing out in the colder weather. One afternoon received a call about a missing hiker. A young woman named Sarah had gone out for a hike the previous day and hadn't returned. Her family was worried, and a search party was quickly assembled. As the head ranger, it was my responsibility to lead the search and ensure we found her quickly and safely. We started at the trailhead where Sarah had last been seen. The trail wound through dense forest, up steep hills, and across rocky terrain. It was a challenging hike, even for experienced outdoorsmen, and the fading daylight added to the urgency of our search. "Stay together and keep an eye out for any signs of her," I instructed the team. "Footprints, clothing, anything that might help us track her down." We spread out and moved methodically along the trail, calling out Sarah's name and scanning the ground for clues. As we ventured deeper into the forest, a sense of unease began to settle over us. The forest seemed darker and more oppressive, the trees closing in around us. After several hours of searching, we found a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. It matched the description of the clothes Sarah had been wearing. We followed the trail, the sense of unease growing stronger with each step. "Tom, over here," one of the rangers called out. I hurried over and saw what had caught his attention. There were strange markings on the ground, like claw marks, and the underbrush was trampled. It looked like there had been a struggle. "What could have done this?" another ranger asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. "But we need to find her quickly." We followed the trail of broken branches and disturbed earth, the forest growing darker and more foreboding. The claw marks continued, leading us to a narrow, overgrown path that wasn't on any of the park's maps. "This path isn't supposed to be here," I said, frowning. "Be careful, we don't know where it leads." We pressed on, the path winding through the dense forest. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over the woods. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot. Suddenly, we heard a faint, high-pitched scream. It was coming from up ahead, deeper in the forest. "That must be Sarah," one of the rangers said, his voice urgent. "We need to hurry." We quickened our pace, the path growing narrower and more treacherous. The scream grew louder and more desperate, and we knew we were getting closer. Finally, we broke through the trees and into a small clearing. There, we saw Sarah, huddled against a tree, her eyes wide with terror. Standing over her was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, with long, bony limbs and sharp claws. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and it let out a guttural snarl as we approached. "Stay back," I shouted, drawing my weapon. "Get away from her." The creature turned towards us, its eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. Then, with a sudden burst of adrenaline, I fired a warning shot into the air. The creature let out a screech and lunged at us. We fired again, this time hitting it squarely in the chest. It stumbled back, snarling and hissing, before turning and disappearing into the forest. We rushed over to Sarah and helped her to her feet. She was shaking and crying, her clothes torn and dirty. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I was going to die." "It's okay, you're safe now," I said, trying to reassure her. "Let's get you out of here." We made our way back to the main trail, keeping a close watch for any sign of the creature. The sense of unease lingered, but we were relieved to have found Sarah alive. Back at the ranger station, We tended to Sarah's injuries and called her family to let them know she was safe. She told us about the creature and how it had stalked her through the forest, its eyes glowing in the darkness. "I don't know what it was," she said, her voice shaky. "But it wasn't human. It was like a nightmare come to life." The experience left us all deeply shaken, and we vowed to increase patrols and keep a closer watch on the park. Black Ridge National Park is a place of breathtaking beauty, but it is also a place of secrets and danger. Some things are best left unexplored, and some stories are best left untold. As a park ranger, I've seen my fair share of strange and unexplained events. But nothing compares to that night in Black Ridge. The forest is a place of mystery and wonder, but it is also a place of darkness and terror. And sometimes, the things that go bump in the night are all too real. My name is Jack, and I've been a park ranger at Redwood Valley for nearly 15 years. I've always loved the forest of towering trees, the crisp air, and the serenity that comes with being surrounded by nature. But sometimes, the forest holds secrets that are better left undiscovered. It was early spring, and the park was just beginning to come alive after the long winter. The first hikers and campers were starting to trickle in, eager to experience the beauty of Redwood Valley. One of my duties was to patrol the more remote areas of the park, ensuring that everything was in order and that no one was in danger. One evening, as the sun began to set, I received a distress call from a group of campers. They were deep in the forest, near an area known as Hollow Glen. The signal was weak and crackling, but I could make out the fear in their voices. "Help us, please," a woman's voice pleaded. "Something's out here with us. We're at the Hollow Glen campsite. Please, hurry." It grabbed my gear and radioed for backup, but the nearest ranger was over an hour away. I had to go alone. As I made my way through the forest, the shadows grew longer, and an eerie stillness settled over the woods. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. I arrived at the Hollow Glen campsite just as darkness fell. The campsite was deserted, the fire still smoldering, and tents scattered around. There was no sign of the campers. I called out, but my voice seemed to vanish into the void. "Hello, is Anio Neher?" No response. I felt a chill run down my spine as I scanned the area. There were signs of a struggle, broken branches, scattered belongings, and footprints leading away from the campsite. I followed the trail, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The trail led me deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around me. The air grew colder, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. I knew I should have waited for backup, but I couldn't leave those campers out here alone. After what felt like an eternity, came across a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and foreboding. The trail of footprints led straight to the front door, which hung open on rusty hinges. I approached cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the inside of the cabin. The interior was a mess, broken furniture, shattered glass, and strange symbols etched into the walls. The air was thick with the smell of decay. "Hello, is anyone in here?" I heard a faint sound, like a whisper, coming from the back of the cabin. I moved slowly, my flashlight revealing more of the disturbing scene. As I reached the back room, I saw theft campers huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "Thank God you're here," one of them said, a young man named David. "We thought we were done for." "What happened?" I asked, helping them to their feet. "We were sitting around the campfire," Sarah, the woman who had made the call, explained. "Then we heard something in the woods. It sounded like whispers, but there was no one there. And then we saw it." "Saw hat, a creature," David said, his voice shaking. "It was tall, with long limbs and glowing eyes. It chased us through the forest. We managed to lose it, but we ended up here. We need to get out of here," I said, my own fear mounting. "Stay close and keep quiet." We left the cabin, the darkness pressing in on us from all sides. The forest seemed to come alive with strange sounds, rustling leaves, distant whispers, and the occasional snap of a twig. I kept my flashlight trained on the path, my heart pounding in my chest. As we made our way back to the main trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle, every shadow seemed to hide some unseen threat. The campers were silent, their fear palpable. We finally reached the main trail, and I radioed for backup again, this time with a clearer signal. I could hear the relief in the dispatcher's voice as they confirmed that help was on the way. We waited in the darkness, every minute feeling like an hour. Suddenly, the forest erupted with movement. The creature appeared, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, its limbs long and spindly. The campers screamed, and I raised my flashlight, trying to blind it. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. The creature paused, its eyes narrowing. Then, with a blood-curdling screech, it lunged towards us. I fired my flare gun, the bright light and loud noise startling it. The creature recoiled, giving us a precious moment to run. We sprinted down the trail, the creature's howls echoing behind us. Just as we thought we couldn't go any further, we saw the lights of the ranger station ahead. Backup had arrived, and the creature melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the forest. The campers were taken to safety, and I gave my report to the other rangers. We searched the area thoroughly, but there was no sign of the creature. The camper story was dismissed as a combination of fear and imagination, but I knew better. I had seen it too. My name is Emma, and I've been a park ranger at Timber Creek National Park for nearly 12 years. Timber Creek is a beautiful, sprawling park filled with dense forests, winding rivers, and stunning vistas. It's a place of tranquility and natural beauty, but like many wild places, it has its share of dark secrets. One of the oldest legends in Timber Creek is that of the ghost of Timber Creek, a spectral figure said to haunt the woods near the old logging camp. The story goes back over a century, to when logging was a booming industry in the area. The camp was abandoned after a tragic accident that claimed the lives of several loggers. And since then, locals have reported seeing ghostly apparitions and hearing strange noises in the area. I had always been skeptical of the ghost stories, attributing them to overactive imaginations and the eerie atmosphere of the forest. But one summer, my skepticism was put to the test. It was late July, and the park was bustling with visitors. Families were camping, hikers were exploring the trails, and the river was filled with people enjoying the cool water. One evening, I received a call about a group of campers who had gone missing near the old logging camp. They were supposed to check in with the ranger station, but no one had heard from them since the previous night. I grabbed my gear and set out for the logging camp. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest, and the air was filled with the sounds of chirping crickets and rustling leaves. As I approached the camp, the atmosphere grew heavier, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding settled over me. The logging camp was a collection of dilapidated cabins, their wooden walls weathered and covered in moss. The place had an eerie, abandoned feel, and it was easy to see why people believed it was haunted. I called out for the campers, but there was no response. I started to search the area, my flashlight cutting through the gathering darkness. The cabins were empty, their interiors filled with cobwebs and decaying furniture. I was about to head back and call for backup when I heard a faint, ghostly wail, carried on the wind. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The wail grew louder, more distinct, and it seemed to be coming from deeper in the forest. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, my flashlight flickering as I moved. The wailing led me to a small clearing, where I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a woman, her long hair flowing in the breeze, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She looked at me, her expression one of sorrow and despair. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed to the edge of the clearing. I turned to look, and there, half buried in the underbrush, was a small, weathered grave marker. The name on the marker was barely legible, but I could make out the words Sarah McKinley and the date 1893. When I turned back, the ghostly figure was gone. The wailing had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. I approached the grave marker, my mind racing. Sarah McKinley was one of the loggers who had died in the accident. According to the legend, she had been searching for her lost child when she met her tragic end. As I stood there, piecing together the story, heard voices calling out to me. The missing campers emerged from the forest, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. "We saw her too," one of them, a young man named Alex, said. "The ghost. She led us to this spot. We were lost and scared, and then she appeared. She pointed the way back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The camper's story mirrored my own experience. We gathered around the grave marker, paying our respects to the long-departed Sarah McKinley. As we did, the oppressive feeling in the air seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace. We made our way back to the ranger station, where the campers recounted their experience to the other rangers. Their story was met with skepticism, but I knew the truth. The ghost of Timber Creek wasn't a malevolent spirit, but a guardian, watching over those who wandered too far into the forest. In the days that followed, I did some research into Sarah McKinley's life and death. She had been a logger, yes, but she was also a mother who had lost her child in the wilderness. Her spirit, unable to find peace, continued to search for her child, guiding lost souls back to safety. I often think about that night and the ghostly figure who led us back from the brink. Timber Creek National Park is a place of beauty and wonder, but it is also a place where the past lingers, where the spirits of those who came before us still roam. As a park ranger, I've learned to respect the stories and legends, knowing that sometimes they hold a kernel of truth. And sometimes, the forest's guardians are not what we expect them to be. My name is Hannah, and I've been a park ranger at Whistling Woods for the past decade. Whistling Woods is a breathtaking park, known for its dense forests, crystal clear lakes, and the strange, melodic whistling sounds that often echo through the trees. These sounds have given rise to countless legends and stories, but none as chilling as the one I experienced a few years ago. It was late autumn, and the park was preparing for the quieter winter months. Most of the tourists had left, and only a few die-hard campers and hikers remained. I was on night patrol, ensuring that the park's few remaining visitors were safe, and that the trails were clear. One evening, I received a call from a couple who had set up camp near the Whispering Pines, a particularly remote part of the park. They reported hearing strange whistling sounds that seemed to be getting closer and closer. Concerned, I grabbed my gear and set off toward their campsite. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched underfoot as I made my way through the forest. The whistling sounds, faint at first, began to grow louder and more distinct. It was an eerie, haunting melody, unlike anything I had heard before. It seemed to come from all directions, making it difficult to pinpoint its source. When I arrived at the campsite, the couple, Mark and Lisa, were visibly shaken. They described the sounds as not just eerie, but almost hypnotic, drawing them toward the deeper part of the woods. "We thought it was just the wind at first," Mark said, his voice trembling. "But then it started to sound like music, like someone was playing a flute. We tried to ignore it," Lisa added, "but it just kept getting louder. We felt like we had to follow it." I assured them that I would investigate and told them to stay close to their campsite. I ventured deeper into the forest, following the haunting melody. The further I went, the louder the whistling became, and the more disoriented I felt. It was as if the sound was pulling me, guiding me through the trees. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon an old, forgotten trail that I had never seen before. The trees around me seemed ancient, their twisted branches creating an almost impenetrable canopy. The whistling was deafening now, and I felt a growing sense of unease. I pushed forward, my flashlight flickering as if struggling to stay lit. The trail led me to a small clearing, and in the center stood a stone circle, weathered by time and covered in moss. The whistling seemed to emanate from within the circle, an unearthly sound that sent chills down my spine. As I approached the circle, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows. It was an old man, dressed in tattered clothes, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. He held a flute carved from bone, and as he played, the whistling filled the air. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the haunting melody. The old man stopped playing and looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to span centuries. "I am the guardian of Whistling Woods," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "I have been here for longer than I can remember, bound to this place by a curse." "A curse?" I echoed, taking a cautious step forward. He nodded. "Many years ago, I was a musician, a wanderer, who played my flute to bring joy to those who heard it. But one night, I played a tune that angered the spirits of the forest. They cursed me, binding me to this place, forever, to play the haunting melody you hear. Is there any way to break the curse?" I asked, feeling a strange mix of fear and pity. "There is," he replied, "but it requires a great sacrifice. Someone must willingly take my place, allowing me to finally rest." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The thought of being bound to this forest, to play that haunting melody for eternity, was terrifying. I don't know if I can do that," I stammered. The old man sighed, his expression one of resignation. "I understand. Few have the courage to make such a sacrifice. But remember, the forest is always listening. The spirits are always watching." As he spoke, the whistling began to fade, and the old man slowly vanished into the shadows. The stone circle remained, a silent reminder of the curse that bound him. I made my way back to the campsite, the haunting melody still echoing in my mind. Mark and Lisa were relieved to see me, but I could tell they sensed the change in my demeanor. "What happened out there?" Mark asked. "It's a long story," I replied, glancing back toward the forest. "But I think it's best if we leave this place tonight." We packed up their campsite and made our way back to the main trail. The whistling had stopped, replaced by the familiar sounds of the forest. But I knew that the legend of Whistling Woods was more than just a story. It was a warning, a reminder of the ancient forces that still linger in the wild places of the world. As a park ranger, I've encountered many strange and unsettling things. But the haunting melody of Whistling Woods will stay with me forever. A chilling reminder of the sacrifices that some must make to keep the forest's secrets hidden. My name is Lucas, and I have been a park ranger at Evergreen National Park for the past 8 years. This park is known for its lush forests, cascading waterfalls, and the legendary Forgotten Path, a trail that many believe doesn't exist. Over the years, I had heard numerous stories about this mythical path, but I always dismissed them as mere folklore. That changed during one fateful summer when I encountered something that would forever alter my perception of the park. It was a warm August afternoon, and the park was alive with the sounds of nature and the laughter of visitors. I was on my routine patrol, ensuring that everything was in order. As I walked along one of the less frequented trails, I spotted an old man sitting on a fallen log. He looked to be in his late 60s, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. "Afternoon," I greeted him. "Everingthalerite." The old man nodded, but there was a distant look in his eyes. "Just reminiscing about old times," he said. "I used to come here with my wife. This place holds many memories." We chatted for a while, and he shared stories of his adventures in the park. As the conversation progressed, he mentioned something that piqued my curiosity. "Have you ever heard of the Forgotten Path?" he asked. I chuckled. "Yeah, I've heard the stories. But it's just a myth, right? A legend to spook the tourists." The old man's expression turned serious. "It's no myth. The path is real, and it leads to a place where time stands still." I was intrigued but skeptical. "And have you seen it?" Hinted slowly. "Once. A long time ago. It's not easy to find, and even harder to leave." He went on to explain that the path only appears to those who are truly lost, either physically or spiritually. It's a place where people can confront their deepest fears and desires. Despite my skepticism, his words resonated with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some truth to his story. After our conversation, I continued my patrol, but the old man's words lingered in my mind. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the forest, I decided to take a detour and explore a rarely used trail. It was a path I had walked many times before, but this time, something felt different. The forest grew denser, and the familiar sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. I walked for what felt like hours, the trees growing taller and more imposing with each step. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw a narrow, overgrown trail veering off to the left. It was barely noticeable, almost as if it was hiding from plain sight. My heart raced as I approached the trail. Could this be the forgotten path? Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the path, the foliage closing in around me. The further I walked, the more surreal my surroundings became. The trees seemed to twist and bend, their branches forming strange, almost human-like shapes. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. The air was thick with the sense of foreboding, and I felt a chill run down my spine. As I approached the cabin, I noticed a faint light flickering inside. Pushing open the creaky door, I stepped into a dimly lit room. The interior was sparse, with only a few pieces of old furniture and a fireplace that hadn't seen a fire in years. Suddenly, I heard a soft voice behind me, "Lucas." I spun around, my flashlight illuminating the figure of a young woman. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes were sad but kind. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My name is Evelyn," she replied. "I've been waiting for someone like you." "Waiting for me? Why?" "To help me find peace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trapped here for so long, unable to move on." Evelyn explained that she had once lived in the cabin with her family. One night, a terrible storm swept through the forest, and a landslide buried the cabin. She had died in the disaster, but her spirit remained, bound to the place where she had lost her life. "Please," she pleaded, "help me find my way back to my family." I felt a surge of compassion for Evelyn and vowed to help her. We left the cabin and made our way back along the forgotten path. As we walked, Evelyn shared more about her life and the love she had for her family. Her story was heartbreaking, and I could feel her pain as if it were my own. Finally, we reached the edge of the forest, where the path began to fade. Evelyn stopped and turned to me, a look of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas," she said. "You've given me the strength to move on." With that, she began to fade, her spirit dissolving into the air. I watched as she disappeared, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. When I returned to the park, the old man was gone, leaving no trace behind. I never saw him again, but I often think of his words and the journey he set me on. The forgotten path is real, and it leads not just through the forest, but through the deepest parts of our souls. As a park ranger, I've learned that the wilderness holds many secrets, and not all of them can be explained. Some paths are meant to be walked, not to be understood. And sometimes, the journey itself is the answer we seek. My name is Ethan, and for the past 12 years, I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Forest. This place is a haven for hikers, campers, and nature lovers. With its towering pine trees, serene lakes, and endless trails, it's a slice of paradise. However, there are parts of the forest that even seasoned rangers like myself tend to avoid. There's a particular area known as the Silent Grove, a dense, uncharted section of the forest with an eerie reputation. One summer evening received a call about a missing hiker named Sarah. She had ventured off trail and hadn't been heard from in over 24 hours. I gathered my gear and set out immediately, determined to find her before nightfall. The search led me deeper into the forest than I had ever been. The trees grew thicker, and the usual sounds of wildlife seemed to fade away, replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't long before I realized I had wandered into the silent grove. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, I caught sight of something glimmering in the distance. It was a small, weathered cabin, almost hidden by the overgrown foliage. This cabin wasn't on any of our maps, and I had never heard of it before. I approached cautiously, hoping that Sarah might have taken refuge inside. The cabin's door creaked open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. I called out Sarah's name, but there was no response. The place appeared abandoned, with cobwebs hanging from the corners and an overwhelming sense of neglect. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a piece of fabric caught on a broken window bright blue, like the jacket Sarah had been wearing. My heart raced as I stepped outside to search the surrounding area. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I spotted a narrow path leading away from the cabin and decided to follow it. The path was overgrown, as if it hadn't been used in years, but something compelled me to keep going. The further I walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The silence was unnerving, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, a whisper carried by the wind. I stopped and listened, but it was gone. As I continued, the whispering returned, growing louder and more insistent. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. The path led me to a clearing, and there, standing in the center, was a tall, gaunt figure. He was dressed in old, tattered ranger gear, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "I'm looking for a missing hiker. Have you seen a yoni?" The figure remained silent, but he slowly lifted his head, revealing hollow, sunken eyes. A chill ran down my spine as I realized he wasn't human, at least, not anymore. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said in a raspy voice. "This place is not for the living." I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. "Who are you?" "I am the Watcher," he replied. "Bound to this forest, cursed to protect it from those who would disturb its peace." "Please," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just want to find Sarah and get out of here." The Watcher's eyes seemed to soften for a moment. "The girl is safe, but you must leave now. The forest does not take kindly to intruders." Before I could respond, the whispering grew louder, surrounding me. Shadows seemed to move among the trees, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned and ran back the way I had come, the whispers chasing me through the forest. When I finally reached the cabin, I found Sarah huddled inside, her eyes wide with fear. She was unhurt, but clearly shaken. We left the silent grove as quickly as we could, the oppressive silence lifting as we moved further away. Back at the ranger station, I filed my report, leaving out the supernatural elements. Who would believe me anyway? Sarah confirmed that she had been lost and found the cabin, but she didn't mention seeing the Watcher. Over the years, I've learned that Whispering Pines holds many secrets, and the Silent Grove is just one of them. The forest is alive in ways we can't fully understand, and sometimes, it needs Somiani or Somathing to watch over it. I still patrol the park, always mindful of the boundaries we shouldn't cross. The Watcher of Whispering Pines remains a mystery, but his warning is clear: some places are meant to be left undisturbed. And not all who wander are lost, but some who wander find more than they bargained for. My name is Ethan, and for the past 12 years, I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Forest. This place is a haven for hikers, campers, and nature lovers. With its towering pine trees, serene lakes, and endless trails, It's a slice of paradise. However, there are parts of the forest that even seasoned rangers like myself tend to avoid. There's a particular area known as the Silent Grove, a dense, uncharted section of the forest with an eerie reputation. One summer evening received a call about a missing hiker named Sarah. She had ventured off trail and hadn't been heard from in over 24 hours. I gathered my gear and set out immediately, determined to find her before nightfall. The search led me deeper into the forest than I had ever been. The trees grew thicker, and the usual sounds of wildlife seemed to fade away, replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't long before I realized I had wandered into the Silent Grove. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, I caught sight of something glimmering in the distance. It was a small, weathered cabin, almost hidden by the overgrown foliage. This cabin wasn't on any of our maps, and I had never heard of it before. I approached cautiously, hoping that Sarah might have taken refuge inside. The cabin's door creaked open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. I called out Sarah's name, but there was no response. The place appeared abandoned, with cobwebs hanging from the corners and an overwhelming sense of neglect. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a piece of fabric caught on a broken window bright blue, like the jacket Sarah had been wearing. My heart raced as I stepped outside to search the surrounding area. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I spotted a narrow path leading away from the cabin and decided to follow it. The path was overgrown, as if it hadn't been used in years, but something compelled me to keep going. The further I walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The silence was unnerving, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, a whisper carried by the wind. I stopped and listened, but it was gone. As I continued, the whispering returned, growing louder and more insistent. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. The path led me to a clearing, and there, standing in the center, was a tall, gaunt figure. He was dressed in old, tattered ranger gear, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "I'm looking for a missing hiker. Have you seen a Yoni?" The figure remained silent, but he slowly lifted his head, revealing hollow, sunken eyes. A chill ran down my spine as I realized he wasn't human, at least, not anymore. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said in a raspy voice. "This place is not for the living." I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to run. "Who are you?" "I am the Watcher," he replied. "Bound to this forest, cursed to protect it from those who would disturb its peace." "Please," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just want to find Sarah and get out of here." The Watcher's eyes seemed to soften for a moment. "The girl is safe, but you must leave now. The forest does not take kindly to intruders." Before I could respond, the whispering grew louder, surrounding me. Shadows seemed to move among the trees, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned and ran back the way I had come, the whispers chasing me through the forest. When I finally reached the cabin, I found Sarah huddled inside, her eyes wide with fear. She was unhurt, but clearly shaken. We left the Silent Grove as quickly as we could, the oppressive silence lifting as we moved further away. Back at the ranger station, I filed my report, leaving out the supernatural elements. Who would believe me anyway? Sarah confirmed that she had been lost and found the cabin, but she didn't mention seeing the Watcher. Over the years, I've learned that Whispering Pines holds many secrets, and the Silent Grove is just one of them. The forest is alive in ways we can't fully understand, and sometimes, it needs Somiani or Somathing to watch over it. I still patrol the park, always mindful of the boundaries we shouldn't cross. The Watcher of Whispering Pines remains a mystery, but his warning is clear: some places are meant to be left undisturbed. And not all who wander are lost, but some who wander find more than they bargained for. My name is Claire, and I have served as a park ranger at Moonshadow Forest for the past 7 years. The forest, known for its dense thickets and serene beauty, has always had an air of mystery about it. Nestled deep within its confines are countless tales of ghostly apparitions and inexplicable phenomena. One such legend is that of the phantom lights, ethereal glows that appear in the darkest parts of the forest, said to guide or mislead those who follow them. I always thought of them as mere campfire stories, until one unforgettable night changed everything. It was early September, and a chill had begun to settle over the forest. The leaves were turning, and the park was a riot of color. Despite the beauty of the season, there was an underlying tension among the rangers. 2 hikers had gone missing a week ago, and despite extensive searches, we had found no trace of them. Their disappearance was unsettling, and I was determined to find some answers. One evening, I decided to venture into the heart of Moonshadow Forest, a place few dared to go after sunset. The sky was clear, and the full moon cast an eerie glow over the landscape. I equipped myself with my flashlight, radio, and a sense of determination. If the phantom lights were real, maybe they could lead me to the missing hikers. I walked for hours, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves, the forest growing darker and more oppressive. The usual sounds of the night crickets, owls, rustling leaves seemed to fade away, leaving an unsettling silence in their wake. I was about to turn back when I saw a faint, bluish light flickering in the distance. My heart raced. The stories of the phantom lights flooded my mind, but I pushed my fear aside and headed towards the glow. The light seemed to dance through the trees, always just out of reach. I followed it deeper into the forest, my flashlight barely piercing the darkness around me. The light led me to a small clearing I had never seen before. In the center stood an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The bluish glow surrounded the tree, illuminating something at its base. As I approached, I saw a bundle of clothes and a backpack items that matched the description of what the missing hikers had been wearing. I called out, my voice trembling, but there was no response. I examined the belongings, finding a journal inside the backpack. The entries were frantic, detailing how the hikers had followed the lights, hoping they would lead them to safety. Instead, they had found themselves trapped in an endless maze of trees and shadows. As I read, the temperature seemed to drop, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, my flashlight illuminating the figure of a young woman. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and there was a haunting sadness in her gaze. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, but her gaze shifted to the journal in my hands. I realized she must have been one of the phantom light's previous victims. She pointed towards the ancient oak, and I noticed something carved into the bark names. Dozens of them, each representing a soul lost to the forest. I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out of there and report what I had found. But as I turned to leave, the bluish light surrounded me, growing brighter and more intense. The forest seemed to come alive with whispers and shadows, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. The young woman's voice echoed in my mind. "Help us." I didn't know how, but I couldn't abandon them. I ran back to the ranger station, my heart pounding, determined to uncover the truth behind the phantom lights and find a way to release the trapped souls. Over the following days, I researched the history of Moonshadow Forest and discovered that the ancient oak was once the site of a tragic event. Centuries ago, villagers had been accused of witchcraft and executed at that very spot. Their spirits, unable to find peace, became the phantom lights, guiding or trapping those who ventured too close. I gathered a team of rangers and returned to the clearing. We conducted a ritual to honor the lost souls and break the curse that bound them to the forest. As we completed the ceremony, the bluish lights appeared one last time, brighter than ever, before fading into the night. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. We found the remains of the missing hikers and gave them a proper burial. The ancient oak, once a place of sorrow, became a symbol of peace and remembrance. The phantom lights never appeared again, and the legend of Moonshadow Forest took on a new meaning. As a park ranger, I've learned that the forest is more than just trees and trails. It's a place of history and mystery, where the past and present intertwine. Moonshadow Forest taught me that some legends are real, and sometimes it's our duty to uncover the truth and bring peace to those who have been forgotten. My name is Greg, and I've been a park ranger at Black Hollow Forest for nearly 15 years. Black Hollow is notorious for its dark, dense woods and a history of strange disappearances dating back to the early 1900s. It's a place steeped in mystery and superstition, with locals often whispering about a curse that haunts the forest. I never put much stock in these tales until the summer of 2022, when I experienced something that changed my perspective forever. The story begins with a distress call we received about a missing family. The Thompsons, a father, mother, and their 2 young children, had been camping near Black Hollow's infamous Dead Man's Trail and hadn't returned. The trail is known for its treacherous paths and unsettling atmosphere, but it's also a favorite for thrill seekers. Given the urgency, I immediately set out to find them. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the familiar sense of unease settled over me. The thick canopy blocked out most of the sunlight, and the air grew cooler, almost clammy. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I followed the trail markers, calling out the family's names, but there was no response. About an hour into my search, I stumbled upon their campsite. It was eerily quiet and abandoned. The tent was still pitched, and their belongings were scattered around, but there was no sign of the Thompsons. I radioed for backup and continued to search the surrounding area. I found a trail leading away from the campsite and decided to follow it. The path was overgrown, with thorny bushes and twisted roots, making progress slow and difficult. After about 20 minutes, I heard a faint sound, a child's cry. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding, and soon came upon a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, decrepit cabin. It wasn't on any of our maps, and I had never seen it before. The crying seemed to be coming from inside. I approached cautiously, my flashlight in hand. The door creaked open, and I stepped into the dimly lit interior. The cabin was musty and filled with cobwebs. The crying had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. As I moved further in, I saw the Thompsons, huddled together in a corner, their faces pale with fear. "Are you all right?" I asked, rushing to their side. "What happened?" Mr. Thompson looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. "We were hiking when we heard strange noises. We tried to find our way back, but we got lost. Then we saw the Lychee's ghostly blue lights and they led us here." Mrs. Thompson clutched her children, her voice trembling. "We've been hearing whispers, seeing shadows. We can't leave. Something's keeping us here." I glanced around the cabin, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was oppressive, and I felt a sense of dread creeping over me. Determined to get the family to safety, I helped them to their feet and led them out of the cabin. As we made our way back to the main trail, the forest seemed to close in around us. The once faint whispers grew louder, and I could see flickering lights in the distance. We moved as quickly as we could, the children clinging to their parents. The forest seemed to resist our progress, with the path twisting and turning in unnatural ways. Finally, we broke through the dense underbrush and reached the main trail. The whispers faded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We hurried back to the ranger station, where the Thompsons were treated for minor injuries and exhaustion. I filed my report, detailing the strange occurrences and the mysterious cabin. My colleagues were skeptical, but I knew what I had experienced was real. Black Hollow Forest was more than just a place. It was a living, breathing entity with a dark history. Over the next few weeks, I researched the history of Black Hollow and discovered that the cabin had once belonged to a recluse named Samuel Blackwood. In the early 1900s, he was accused of practicing dark magic and was eventually lynched by the townspeople. His spirit, they say, cursed the forest, and the ghostly lights were said to be the souls of those who had fallen victim to his curse. Determined to put an end to the curse, I organized a team to search for the cabin and perform a cleansing ritual. Armed with historical records and advice from local folklore experts, we ventured back into Black Hollow. We found the cabin, and as we performed the ritual, the atmosphere grew even more tense. The whispers and lights intensified, but we pressed on. Finally, as we completed the ritual, there was a sudden, powerful gust of wind, and the cabin seemed to dissolve into the forest, leaving behind only the clearing. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The ghostly lights never appeared again, and the strange occurrences ceased. Black Hollow Forest returned to its natural, albeit still eerie, state. Since that summer, I've come to respect the power of the stories and the history that shapes the places we protect. As a park ranger, my duty is not only to the land, but also to the spirits and memories it holds. Black Hollow taught me that sometimes, the past must be acknowledged and laid to rest so that the future can be at peace. And whenever I pass by the site where the cabin once stood, I leave a small Faringa token of gratitude to Samuel Blackwood, and a reminder that even the darkest curses can be broken with understanding and respect. My name is Jake, and I've been a park ranger at Timberland Reserve for the last decade. The reserve is a sprawling expanse of old growth forest, crisscrossed with trails and dotted with remote ranger stations. It's a place of rugged beauty, but it also holds its share of secrets. One such secret involves a long-lost patrol team from the 1950s, whose disappearance has become the stuff of local legend. I never gave much thought to the tale until I found myself caught up in the mystery during a routine patrol last fall. It was late October, and the air was crisp with the first hints of winter. My partner, Emily, and I had been assigned to check on a series of remote cabins scattered throughout the northern sector of the reserve. These cabins were used by rangers and researchers, and it was our job to ensure they were stocked and secure for the upcoming winter months. We started our patrol early in the morning, hiking through dense forest and climbing steep ridges. The day was uneventful until we reached the third cabin, which was situated near a particularly remote and rugged area known as Devil's Ridge. The cabin was in good shape, but as we were about to leave, we heard a faint, crackling sound on our radius-like static mixed with distant voices. Emily and I exchanged puzzled glances. The radios shouldn't have been picking up anything in such a remote location. We adjusted the frequency, trying to clear the signal, but the static persisted. Amid the crackling, we could just make out fragments of a conversation. It sounded like an old distress call. "This is Ranger Patrol Alpha Lost. Need assistance. Coordinates." The message sent chills down my spine. Ranger Patrol Alpha was the designation of the team that had vanished in the 1950s. According to the legend, the patrol had set out to investigate reports of strange lights and sounds near Devil's Ridge and never returned. Despite extensive searches, no trace of them was ever found. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, Emily and I decided to follow the signal. Using a portable radio direction finder, we traced the source of the transmission to a remote part of the reserve, far off any established trails. The terrain was treacherous, with steep cliffs and dense underbrush making progress slow and difficult. As we got closer, the static grew louder, and the fragments of the distress call became clearer. The coordinates they mentioned led us to a narrow, rocky gorge that cut through the forest like a scar. We carefully made our way down into the gorge, the walls closing in around us. At the bottom, we found a small clearing, and there, partially buried, under decades of fallen leaves and debris, was a rusted, old radio transmitter. Nearby, we discovered remnants of a camp's edited tents, rotting supplies, and a fire pit that hadn't seen use in years. The place had an eerie, haunted feeling, as if it had been frozen in time. We set up camp for the night, determined to investigate further in the morning. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped, and a thick fog rolled in, shrouding the forest in an almost supernatural gloom. The static on our radios persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside our tent. Grabbing my flashlight, I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the fog. The beam of my flashlight cut through the mist, revealing vague, shadowy figures moving among the trees. They seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like phantoms caught between worlds. "Emily, wake up," I whispered urgently, shaking her shoulder. She stirred and followed me outside, her eyes widening as she saw the figures. We watched in silence as the phantoms moved towards the clearing where we had found the old transmitter. Among them, I recognized the faded, ghostly uniforms of park rangers. One of the phantoms, a man with a weary, haunted expression, seemed to notice us. He raised his hand in a gesture that was both a greeting and a plea. I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness and urgency. The figures gathered around the old transmitter, and the static on our radios intensified, filling the air with the cacophony of ghostly voices. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Emily and I approached the clearing. The phantoms turned to us, their eyes filled with a desperate hope. I realized that they were the lost patrol, trapped between life and death, seeking a way to communicate their story. With shaking hands, I adjusted the frequency on the old transmitter, trying to match it to the signal we had been receiving. As I did, the static on our radios suddenly cleared, and a voice came through clear and unmistakable. "This is Ranger Patrol Alpha. We are lost coordinates. Need assistance." I relayed the coordinates back to the ranger station, explaining the situation as best I could. The station chief, skeptical but concerned, promised to send a team to our location at first light. As the message was sent, the phantoms began to fade, their expressions softening into one of relief and gratitude. By dawn, the fog had lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The rescue team arrived, and, guided by the coordinates, we discovered a narrow cave entrance hidden by overgrowth. Inside, we found the remains of the lost patrol, along with journals and equipment that told the story of their final days. They had been trapped by a rockslide and succumbed to the elements, their spirits lingering in the forest, unable to move on. We gave them a proper burial, honoring their memory and finally putting the legend of the lost patrol to rest. The strange occurrences ceased, and the forest returned to its natural state. Timberland Reserve remained a place of beauty and mystery, but now, with one less ghostly secret. As a park ranger, I've learned that the wilderness holds many stories, some told by the living, others whispered by the dead. The Lost Patrol of Timberland Reserve taught me that sometimes, the past reaches out to us, seeking resolution and peace. And it's our duty to listen, to uncover the truth, and to honor those who came before us. My name is Sarah, and I've been a park ranger at Pine Ridge National Park for almost 20 years. Pine Ridge is renowned for its breathtaking landscapes, stunning pine trees, crystal clear lakes, and rugged mountain trails. It's a place where nature's beauty and mystery converge, drawing adventurers and nature enthusiasts from all over. But beneath its picturesque facade, Pine Ridge harbors a dark and unsettling secret that few dare to speak of: the legend of the Phantom Watchers. The story begins on a crisp autumn day, when the park was blanketed in vibrant shades of red, orange, and yellow. I was assigned to patrol the remote northern section of the park, an area rarely visited due to its challenging terrain and dense forest. My partner Rick and I set out early, eager to complete our rounds before the weather turned. We hiked for hours, checking trails and ensuring the cabins were stocked and secure. By late afternoon, we reached a secluded part of the park known as Whispering Pines. It was named for the way the wind seemed to whisper through the trees, creating an eerie, almost supernatural sound. As we made our way through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We arrived at an old, weathered cabin nestled deep within the woods. It was one of the original ranger outposts, built decades ago and now used as a storage facility. The cabin had an air of abandonment, with its creaking floorboards and dusty windows. As we approached, Rick noticed something strange: a set of footprints leading to the cabin door. The prints were fresh, yet we hadn't seen anyone else on our patrol. Cautiously, we entered the cabin, our flashlights cutting through the dim interior. The air was musty, and the only sound was the creaking of the old wood under our boots. As we searched the cabin, we found nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of recent use. No indication of who might have left the footprints. We radioed the ranger station, reporting the footprints and the odd feeling of being watched. The response was routinely just a lost hiker or animal tracks. Nothing to be concerned about. But as night fell and we prepared to camp nearby, that feeling of unease only grew stronger. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside our tent. Rick was already awake, his hand on his flashlight. We exchanged a silent nod and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the cold night air. The forest was shrouded in darkness, the moonlight barely penetrating the dense canopy. As we scanned the area, our flashlights illuminated a series of figures standing at the edge of the clearing. They were dressed in old-fashioned ranger uniforms, their faces obscured by shadows. My heart raced as I realized these weren't ordinary visitors. Were the Phantom Watchers, the ghosts of rangers who had disappeared in the park over the years. The Phantom Watchers were a local legend, said to be the spirits of rangers who had lost their lives in the line of duty. According to the tales, they patrolled the park at night, forever watching over the land they had sworn to protect. Seeing them in person was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. One of the phantoms stepped forward, raising a hand in a gesture that seemed to signal us to follow. Despite my fear, I felt a strange compulsion to obey. Rick and I followed the ghostly figure deeper into the forest, our flashlights flickering as we moved. The other phantoms fell in line behind us, their silent presence both comforting and unnerving. We were led to a hidden grove, where the trees formed a natural cathedral, their branches intertwining high above. In the center of the grove was a stone monument, covered in moss, and nearly hidden by the undergrowth. The phantom pointed to the monument, and as we approached, I saw that it was inscribed with names of rangers who had vanished or died in the park. Among the names were those of the original rangers who had built the cabin we had visited earlier. The monument was a memorial, long forgotten and reclaimed by the forest. The phantoms stood in silent vigil, their presence a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who had come before us. Moved by the sight, Rick and I decided to restore the monument, clearing away the moss and debris. As we worked, the phantoms watched, their expressions unreadable. When we finished, we stood in silence, paying our respects to the fallen rangers. The following morning, the phantoms were gone, and the grove was bathed in sunlight. We returned to the ranger station, determined to honor the memory of the Phantom Watchers. We documented the location of the monument and shared our experience with our colleagues. The park administration agreed to preserve the grove and create a new memorial to the rangers who had lost their lives. Since that night, the legend of the Phantom Watchers has taken on a new significance for me. They are not just ghostly figures haunting the park. They are guardians, watching over the land they loved and protecting those who venture into its depths. Pine Ridge National Park remains a place of beauty and mystery. But now, it also stands as a testament to the bravery and dedication of the rangers who came before us. As a park ranger, I have learned to respect the stories and the spirits that inhabit the places I protect. The Phantom Watchers taught me that the past is never truly gone, and the sacrifices of those who came before us must always be remembered. And so, I continue my patrols, knowing that I'm never truly alone in the woods of Pine Ridge. My name is Mark, and I've been a forest ranger at Whispering Falls National Park for nearly 15 years. This park is a place where nature's beauty and mystery coexist harmoniously, with its towering trees, cascading waterfalls, and hidden trails. However, beneath its serene facade, Whispering Falls holds a history of unexplained disappearances and eerie phenomena that have left even the most seasoned rangers baffled. This story revolves around one such mystery that I encountered during a late summer patrol. It was late August, and the park was alive with the sounds of summer chirping birds, rustling leaves, and the distant roar of Whispering Falls. My partner, Laura, and I were tasked with checking on the remote eastern section of the park, an area known for its dense forest and treacherous terrain. We set out early, hoping to finish our rounds before dusk. The day was uneventful until we reached a rarely used trail that led to an old fire lookout tower. The tower, built in the 1940s, had long since fallen into disrepair and was now more of a historical landmark than a functional structure. As we approached, I noticed something strange: a thin column of smoke rising from the tower. "Do you see that?" I asked Laura, pointing towards the smoke. She nodded, her brow furrowed in concern. "Looks like someone's up there. But who would be camping in the tower?" We quickened our pace, the trail becoming steeper and more overgrown as we neared the lookout. When we arrived, we found the door to the tower ajar, creaking on its rusty hinges. Inside, the smell of smoke was strong, but there was no sign of a fire. Instead, we found a small, makeshift campan, old sleeping bag, some canned food, and a lantern that flickered with a weak flame. "Hello?" Laura called out, her voice echoing through the empty tower. "Is anyone here?" There was no response, just the eerie silence of the abandoned structure. We searched the tower from top to bottom, but found no one. The campsite looked like it had been used recently, yet there were no signs of who had been there or where they had gone. As we descended the tower, I noticed something etched into the wooden railing of the staircase: an inscription that read, "Help us. Trapped. Coordinates 42.614-121.217. "Laura, look at this," I said, pointing to the inscription. She read it and pulled out her GPS. "These coordinates are deep in the forest, near Whispering Falls. We need to check it out." We radioed the ranger station, informing them of the situation and our plan to investigate the coordinates. With our gear packed and flashlights ready, we ventured deeper into the forest, following the GPS towards the mysterious location. The hike was challenging, the terrain becoming increasingly rugged and the forest growing denser with each step. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the sounds of the forest seemed to close in around us. The coordinates led us to a secluded clearing near the base of Whispering Falls, where we found an old, weathered signpost pointing towards an overgrown trail. "This must be it," I said, shining my flashlight on the faded sign. We followed the trail, which wound through the forest and led us to a small, hidden cave. The entrance was partially obscured by thick vines and underbrush, but the GPS indicated that this was the exact location of the coordinates. Cautiously, we entered the cave, our flashlights illuminating the dark, narrow passage. As we ventured deeper, we came across a series of crude drawings. On the cave walls, images of people, trees, and strange symbols that seemed to tell a story. The drawings grew more elaborate as we progressed, depicting scenes of distress and despair. At the end of the passage, we found a small chamber. In the center of the chamber was a fire pit, surrounded by the remains of what looked like an old campsite. But it was the far wall that caught our attention. Etched into the stone were more inscriptions, detailing the plight of a group of rangers who had been trapped in the cave during a rockslide in the 1950s. They had survived for weeks, hoping for rescue, but eventually succumbed to the elements. Among the inscriptions was a final, desperate plea: "To those who find this, we are the lost rangers of Whispering Falls. Our spirits remain to guard this place. Help us find peace." As we read the inscriptions, the air in the cave grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over us. It was as if the spirits of the lost rangers were still present, watching us, pleading for help. We documented everything, taking photographs and notes, determined to ensure their story would not be forgotten. The next day, we returned to the ranger station and reported our findings. The park administration organized a team to further investigate the cave and properly document the site. A memorial was established at the entrance to Whispering Falls, honoring the lost rangers and their sacrifice. Since that discovery, the eerie occurrences in the park have lessened, as if the spirits of the lost rangers have finally found some semblance of peace. Whispering Falls remains a place of natural beauty and mystery, but now it also stands as a testament to the resilience and dedication of those who protect our wild spaces. As a forest ranger, I've learned that the wilderness holds many secrets, and it's our duty to uncover and honor the stories of those who came before us. The lost rangers of Whispering Falls taught me that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit endures, and our duty to remember and protect never fades. My name is Jake, and I've served as a park ranger in Sentinel Peak National Park for over a decade. Nestled in the heart of the Rockies, Sentinel Peak is known for its rugged beauty, with jagged mountain peaks, lush forests, and crystal-clear lakes. But like many natural wonders, it harbors secrets and legends that defy explanation. One such tale, which I personally encountered, revolves around a mysterious figure known as the Shadow of Sentinel Peak. It was a chilly October afternoon when I was assigned to patrol the remote western boundary of the park. The air was crisp, and the trees were ablaze with the colors of fall. My partner, Emily, and I set out to check on the old fire lookout tower perched atop Sentinel Peak. The tower, built in the 1930s, had been out of use for years, but still served as a historical landmark. As we hiked up the steep trail, the weather began to change. Dark clouds rolled in, and a dense fog enveloped the mountain, reducing visibility to just a few feet. Despite the worsening conditions, we pressed on, determined to complete our patrol. When we finally reached the lookout tower, it stood shrouded in mist, its wooden structure creaking in the wind. The tower had an eerie, abandoned feel, as if it were frozen in time. We climbed the rickety stairs to the observation deck, where we found a worn journal left by one of the original rangers. Flipping through the pages, we discovered entries detailing strange occurrences, noises, sightings of a shadowy figure, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The final entry was particularly chilling. The shadow is real. It follows me everywhere. I fear I may never leave this place. Emily and I exchanged uneasy glances. We had heard the stories about the shadow of Sentinel Peak, a ghostly figure said to haunt the mountain, appearing only in the thickest fog. Some believed it was the spirit of a ranger who had died in a rockslide decades ago, while others thought it was an ancient guardian of the mountain. As night fell, we decided to camp near the tower, hoping to investigate further in the morning. The fog grew thicker, and the temperature dropped, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere. We sat by the campfire, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over us. Around midnight, the silence was shattered by a distant, mournful wail. It echoed through the fog, sending chills down my spine. We grabbed our flashlights and ventured out, following the sound. The wail grew louder and more distinct as we approached the edge of a dense forest. Suddenly, Emily froze, her flashlight beam illuminating a shadowy figure standing among the trees. It was tall and indistinct, its form shifting and blending with the fog. The figure seemed to watch us, its presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the eerie silence of the forest. The shadowy figure remained motionless, its gaze fixed on us. After a few tense moments, it began to move, gliding deeper into the woods. We followed, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity. The figure led us to a clearing, where we found an old, weathered monument. It was covered in moss and partially buried in the earth. As we brushed away the debris, we uncovered an inscription, in memory of Ranger Thomas Carter, who gave his life to protect Sentinel Peak. The name struck a chord. Thomas Carter was the ranger who had written the journal we found in the lookout tower. According to park records, he had died in a rockslide while trying to warn hikers of an impending storm. His body was never recovered, and his spirit was said to haunt the mountain. As we stood before the monument, the shadowy figure seemed to fade into the fog, leaving us with a profound sense of sadness and respect. We realized that the shadow of Sentinel Peak was not a malevolent spirit, but rather the restless soul of Ranger Carter, still fulfilling his duty to protect the park. The following day, we reported our experience to the park administration. A decision was made to restore the monument and create a memorial trail in honor of Ranger Carter. The legend of the shadow of Sentinel Peak was officially recognized, and the story of Thomas Carter became an integral part of the park's history. Since that night, visitors to Sentinel Peak National Park have reported occasional sightings of a shadowy figure in the fog, especially near the lookout tower and the memorial trail. These sightings, rather than being a source of fear, have become a reminder of the dedication and sacrifice of those who protect our natural treasures. For me, the experience was a poignant reminder of the bond between rangers and the land they safeguard. Ranger Carter's spirit continues to watch over Sentinel Peak, ensuring that its beauty and mystery endure for future generations. And as I continue my patrols, I do so with a renewed sense of purpose and respect for the unseen guardians of the wilderness. My name is Ethan, and I've worked as a forest ranger at Red Pine Forest Reserve for over a decade. The reserve, with its sprawling woods, serene lakes, and secluded trails, is a haven for nature enthusiasts and adventurers. However, beneath its tranquil surface, there lies a history of strange occurrences and ghostly encounters, especially around the old ranger cabins deep within the forest. This is the story of one such encounter that left a lasting impact on my life. It was a brisk October morning when I received a call from the park headquarters. A group of campers had reported seeing strange lights and hearing eerie sounds near the old ranger cabins at the far end of the reserve. These cabins, built in the early 1900s, had long been abandoned and were now used as storage, and occasionally as shelters for rangers on extended patrols. Curious and somewhat skeptical, I decided to investigate. My partner, Sarah, and I packed our gear and set out for the cabins. The hike was long and arduous, taking us through dense thickets and over rocky terrain. As we neared the cabins, the forest grew silent, almost unnaturally so. The usual sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. The cabins came into view, their weathered wooden structures standing in stark contrast to the vibrant colors of the forest. We approached cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of activity. The first cabin we checked was empty, filled only with old equipment and dusty furniture. As we moved to the second cabin, we noticed something strange, a faint, bluish light emanating from within. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with apprehension. I nodded, gripping my flashlight tightly. "Let's check it out." We approached the cabin, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The source of the light was an old, oil lantern sitting on a table in the center of the room. It flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. But what caught our attention was the figure standing in the corner, a tall, shadowy silhouette that seemed to be watching us. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The figure remained motionless, its features obscured by the darkness. As we stepped closer, it slowly began to fade, dissolving into thin air. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and a chill ran down my spine. Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what we had just witnessed. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to spend the night in the cabins. We set up our sleeping bags in the main cabin and built a fire to keep warm. As the night wore on, the eerie feeling persisted. We heard strange noise whispers, footsteps, and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. At one point, I thought I saw a figure moving outside the window, but when I went to check, there was nothing there. Around midnight, we heard a loud bang coming from the second cabin. We grabbed our flashlights and rushed over, finding the door ajar and the interior in disarray. The lantern was still burning, but its light seemed weaker, casting an otherworldly glow on the walls. On the floor, we found an old, leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with entries dating back to the early 1900s, detailing the life of a ranger named James Hawkins. As we read through the journal, we discovered a chilling account of James' final days. He wrote about strange occurrences in the forest lights in the trees, disembodied voices, and the feeling of being watched. His last entry spoke of a ghostly figure that haunted the cabins, a spirit of a lost hiker who had died in a snowstorm years before. James believed that the spirit was seeking help, trapped between worlds and unable to find peace. The journal ended abruptly, with the final, cryptic message, "The lights are back. I can see her now, she's closer than ever." Just as we finished reading, we heard a soft, mournful wail echoing through the cabin. The air grew colder, and the lantern flickered violently before extinguishing completely, plunging us into darkness. We fumbled for our flashlights, their beams piercing the gloom. Standing in the doorway was the same shadowy figure, now more defined and closer than before. "Please, help me," a voice whispered, barely audible. The figure moved towards us, its form becoming clearer. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned hiking clothes, her face pale and eyes filled with sorrow. She reached out a hand, and as her fingers brushed against mine, a wave of emotions washed over me: fear, despair, and an overwhelming sense of loss. "How can we help you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. The woman's gaze locked onto mine, and I felt a connection, as if her thoughts were flowing into my mind. She showed me images of her final moments lost in a blizzard, struggling to find shelter, and finally succumbing to the cold near the cabins. She had been trying to reach out for years, her spirit trapped, unable to move on. "We need to find her resting place," I said, understanding what needed to be done. "We need to give her a proper burial." The next day, we searched the area around the cabins, looking for any signs of the woman's remains. After hours of digging through the snow and underbrush, we found here a skeletal hand, protruding from the ground near the base of an old pine tree. We carefully uncovered her remains and held a small ceremony, laying her to rest with dignity and respect. As we finished, the air grew warmer, and the forest seemed to come alive again. Birds began to sing, and the leaves rustled gently in the breeze. The oppressive feeling that had haunted the cabins lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. Since that day, the strange occurrences at the cabins have ceased. Visitors still report an eerie feeling when they visit, but the spirit of the lost hiker is no longer there. She has found peace, her story finally told, and her soul set free. For me, the experience was a profound reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden in the wilderness. As a forest ranger, I have a duty not only to protect the land, but also to honor the memories of those who came before us. The haunted cabins of Red Pine Forest taught me that sometimes, the past reaches out to us, seeking closure and understanding. And when it does, we must listen, and help in any way we can. My name is Noah, and I've been a park ranger at Blackwater National Park for nearly 20 years. Blackwater is renowned for its dense, shadowy woods and sprawling wetlands, a place where nature feels untamed and untouched by time. It's a park full of beauty, but also a park with its fair share of mysteries. One such mystery, which I experienced firsthand, involves what we call the Phantom Patrol. It was late November, and the first snows had begun to fall, blanketing the forest in a pristine layer of white. My partner, Leela, and I were assigned to a routine patrol of the northern sector, an area less frequented by visitors due to its rugged terrain and remote location. We set out early, our breaths visible in the cold air, and the forest eerily silent under the snow. The patrol started off uneventful, the quiet only occasionally broken by the crunch of snow beneath our boots. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, and the path became more difficult to follow. We reached an old ranger station, long abandoned and half buried in snow, a relic from a time when the park was first established. Leela and I decided to take a break inside the station. The interior was dark and musty, filled with outdated equipment and forgotten supplies. As we sat down to eat, I noticed an old logbook on a dusty shelf. Out of curiosity, I opened it and began to read. The entries dated back to the 1950s, detailing daily patrols and maintenance work. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone of the entries changed. The logbook's final entries were written by a ranger named Jack Thompson. He described seeing strange lights in the forest, hearing disembodied voices, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. The last entry was particularly unsettling. "They're here. Watching. Waiting. I don't know if I'll make it back." Just as I finished reading, the wind picked up outside, howling through the cracks in the station's walls. Leela and I exchanged uneasy glances, the logbook's ominous words lingering in our minds. We decided to press on, determined to complete our patrol before nightfall. As we left the station, the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The wind grew stronger, whipping through the branches and sending flurries of snow swirling around us. We continued along the path, our senses on high alert. Hours passed, and the daylight began to fade. The forest, already dim and shadowy, grew darker and more oppressive. Suddenly, we heard a faint, distant whispering, carried on the wind. It was indistinct at first, but grew louder and more insistent as we continued. It sounded like multiple voices, murmuring in a language we couldn't understand. "Do you hear that?" Leela asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my hand instinctively moving to my flashlight. "Stay close." We followed the sound, our curiosity overriding our fear. The whispering led us to a clearing, where we saw a flickering light in the distance. It moved erratically, as if someone were carrying a lantern. We approached cautiously, the light growing brighter and more erratic. When we reached the source, we were stunned to find an old, decaying cabin, not marked on any of our maps. The light was coming from inside, casting strange shadows on the snow-covered ground. We called out, but there was no response. With no other choice, we entered the cabin. The interior was empty, save for a single, flickering lantern on the floor. The whispering was louder now, almost deafening, and seemed to come from all around us. The air grew colder, and an oppressive sense of dread settled over us. Just as we were about to leave, we saw them figures emerging. From the shadows, indistinct and ghostly, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Leela and I froze, unable to move or speak. The figures surrounded us, their voices melding into a cacophony of whispers. They seemed to be searching for something or someone. One figure stepped forward, its features becoming clearer. It was a man, dressed in an old ranger uniform, his face gaunt and eyes hollow. "Help us," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the others. "We are lost." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These were the rangers from the logbook, trapped in some kind of spectral limbo, unable to find peace. The man reached out to me, his hand passing through mine like a cold breeze. "We don't know how to help you," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell us what to do." The ghostly ranger pointed to the old logbook I had taken from the abandoned station. "Find the truth. Set us free." Before we could ask any more questions, the figures began to fade, the whispering dying down until we were left in silence. The lantern flickered one last time and went out, plunging us into darkness. We stumbled out of the cabin, our minds reeling from what we had just experienced. Back at the park headquarters, we pored over the old logbook, trying to piece together the mystery. We found records of a search party sent out for Jack Thompson and his team, who had gone missing during a severe snowstorm. Their bodies were never found, and the case remained unsolved. Determined to help the lost rangers, we organized a search of the area around the old cabin. After days of scouring the forest, we discovered a narrow, hidden ravine. At the bottom, partially buried in snow and debris, we found the remains of the missing rangers. They had likely sought shelter from the storm and succumbed to the cold. With this discovery, we arranged a proper burial for the rangers and erected a memorial in their honor. The sense of closure was palpable, not just for us, but for the spirits of the lost rangers. Since then, the reports of strange lights and whispers in the northern sector have ceased. For me, the experience was a haunting reminder of the sacrifices made by those who protect our natural parks. The Phantom Patrol of Blackwater National Park now rests in peace, their story remembered and honored by all who visit. And as a park ranger, I carry their memory with me, a testament to the bond between rangers and the land they serve. My name is Owen, and I've served as a forest ranger at Pine Ridge National Forest for the past 15 years. Pine Ridge is a vast expanse of ancient trees, winding trails, and hidden streams, known for its beauty and tranquility. But there's a part of the forest that's always been avoided by both rangers and visitors, a dark, dense area known as the Shadow Woods. This is the story of my encounter with the darkness that resides there. It all began one crisp autumn day when I received a distress call from a hiker who had lost his way near the Shadow Woods. The call was fragmented and filled with static, but I could make out the fear in his voice. He mentioned seeing something or someone following him. My partner Mike and I set out immediately, hoping to reach the hiker before nightfall. The path to the Shadow Woods was treacherous, covered in fallen leaves and slippery with recent rain. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and denser, blocking out the sunlight and casting eerie shadows on the ground. After an hour of hiking, we reached the edge of the Shadow Woods. The atmosphere changed dramatically. The air was colder, and an unsettling silence hung over the area. We called out for the hiker, but our voices seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. With no other choice, we pressed on, following the faint trail left by the lost man. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The trees seemed to close in around us, their gnarled branches resembling skeletal hands reaching out to grab us. The silence was broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves, making us jumpy and on edge. Suddenly, we heard a faint cry for help. It was the hiker. We quickened our pace, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. As we neared the source of the sound, we saw him, a young man in his 20s, huddled at the base of a massive oak tree, his eyes wide with terror. "Thank God you found me," he gasped, his voice trembling. "There's something out there. It's been following me." Mike and I exchanged worried glances. "What did you see?" I asked, kneeling beside him. The hiker shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know. It was like a shadow, but it moved like a person. I could feel it watching me." We decided to get him out of there as quickly as possible. As we turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something moving. Between the trees, a dark, indistinct shape that seemed to melt into the shadows. I shook it off as a trick of the light and focused on guiding the hiker back to safety. The journey back was tense. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. Every now and then, I felt as though we were being watched, but whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. The hiker's fear was palpable, and it was contagious. As we neared the edge of the Shadow Woods, we heard a low, guttural growl. It reverberated through the trees, freezing us in our tracks. The hiker whimpered, his fear turning to panic. We shone our flashlights in the direction of the sound, but all we saw were shadows dancing in the beam. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice steady but tense. We quickened our pace, the growling growing louder and more aggressive. The shadows seemed to close in around us, and the temperature dropped sharply. Just as we reached the clearing, something darted across our path, a blur of darkness that sent chills down my spine. We broke into a run, not stopping until we were well away from the shadow woods. The hiker was safe, but visibly shaken. As we escorted him back to the ranger station, he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting the shadow to follow. Back at the station, we reported the incident to our supervisor, who dismissed it as the hiker's imagination and our overactive nerves. But Mike and I knew what we saw, or rather, what we felt. There was something in the shadow woods, something malevolent and ancient. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to investigate further. We combed through old ranger logs and local legends, piecing together the history of the shadow woods. What we found was disturbing: a series of disappearances dating back decades, all centered around that dark part of the forest. There were stories of shadowy figures, ghostly apparitions, and an overwhelming sense of dread that drove people mad. Armed with this knowledge, Mike and I returned to the shadow woods, this time prepared for whatever we might encounter. We carried cameras, audio recorders, and extra flashlights, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. The forest was just as eerie as before, but this time, we were ready. As we ventured deeper, the sense of being watched returned, stronger than ever. We heard whispers in the wind, faint and unintelligible, but undeniably real. Our flashlights flickered, casting long, sinister shadows on the ground. Suddenly, Mike pointed to a spot between the trees. "Look," he whispered. I followed his gaze and saw it, a dark, humanoid figure, barely visible in the gloom. It stood motionless, watching us. We raised our cameras and snapped several photos, the flashes briefly illuminating the figure before it melted back into the shadows. We pressed on, our nerves frayed, but our determination unwavering. The deeper we went, the more active the shadows became. They moved around us, darting between trees and disappearing just as quickly. The whispers grew louder, and we could make out words: warnings, threats, pleas for help. Then, we found a small, hidden clearing with an old, crumbling stone altar at its center. The air was thick with malevolence, and the temperature plummeted. As we approached the altar, the shadows converged, forming a circle around us. A voice, deep and echoing, filled the clearing. "Leave this place," it commanded. "You do not belong here." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and spun around, but there was no one there. The shadows closed in, pressing against us, their whispers turning to screams. We were surrounded, trapped in a vortex of darkness. "Run!" Mike shouted, breaking the spell. We bolted, tearing through the forest, the shadows chasing us. The growls and screams followed, growing louder and more frantic. It felt like an eternity, but we finally burst out of the shadow woods, gasping for breath and trembling with fear. We didn't stop running until we reached the ranger station. Our colleagues stared at us, bewildered, as we tried to explain what had happened. We showed them the photos and audio recordings, but they were inconclusive, blurry images and distorted sounds that could be easily dismissed. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Mike and I knew the truth. The shadow woods were haunted by something ancient and evil, something that didn't want to be disturbed. We reported our findings to the park authorities, urging them to close off the area and keep visitors away. To this day, the shadow woods remain off limits, a dark and foreboding part of Pine Ridge National Forest. The stories of shadowy figures and ghostly apparitions continue to circulate, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the light. As a ranger, I've seen many strange and inexplicable things, but nothing compares to the terror of the shadow woods. It's a place where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs, where shadows come to life, and where the past refuses to rest. And it's a place I'll never forget, no matter how many years pass. My name is Ethan, and I've been a forest ranger at Granite Peak National Park for over a decade. Granite Peak is known for its rugged terrain, towering cliffs, and dense forests. It's a place of breathtaking beauty, but also one with a history of strange occurrences. One particular event still haunts me to this day: the disappearance of the lost patrol. It was early spring, and the park was just beginning to wake from its winter slumber. The snow had melted, revealing trails long buried under ice, and the forest was alive with the sounds of animals emerging from hibernation. I was assigned to lead a patrol into the remote northern sector of the park, an area notorious for its challenging terrain and unpredictable weather. My team consisted of 4 other rangers: Mark, an experienced climber; Sarah, our wildlife expert; Alex, a skilled navigator; and Julie, our newest recruit. We set out early in the morning, the air crisp and the sky clear. Our mission was to survey the area for any signs of damage from the harsh winter and to check on the park's wildlife. The first day went smoothly. We hiked through dense forests, crossed swollen rivers, and scaled rocky outcrops. As night fell, we set up camp in a small clearing, the stars twinkling overhead. Around the campfire, we shared stories and laughed, the camaraderie easing the fatigue of the day. The next day, we continued our patrol, venturing deeper into the forest. The terrain became more rugged, and the trails less defined. By midday, we reached an old, abandoned ranger station, a relic from the early days of the park. It was in disrepair, the wooden walls weathered, and the roof partially collapsed. Curious, we decided to take a break and explore the station. Inside, we found old maps, rusty tools, and a dusty logbook. The entries dated back to the 1940s, detailing the daily activities of the rangers who once manned the station. As we flipped through the pages, we came across a series of entries that caught our attention. They spoke of a patrol that had gone missing in the northern sector, never to be found. The final entry was chilling. We hear them at night, whispers in the trees. They call to us, leading us astray. I fear we are not alone in these woods. Unease settled over us as we left the station. We pressed on, but the atmosphere had changed. The forest seemed darker, the trees more foreboding. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered, and a thick fog rolled in, reducing visibility to mere feet. We decided to set up camp early, not wanting to risk getting lost in the fog. That night, as we sat around the fire, we heard a faint whispering carried on the wind. It was barely audible, but unmistakable. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to convince ourselves it was just the wind. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from all directions, surrounding us. "Did you hear that?" Julie asked, her voice trembling. We all nodded, the fear palpable. "Stay close to the fire," I instructed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, be safe here." But the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to be calling our names, urging us to follow. The fog grew thicker, and the firelight barely penetrated the gloom. Just as we were about to retreat to our tents, we saw them figures moving in the fog, indistinct and ghostly. "Who's there?" Mark called out, but there was no response. The figures moved closer, their shapes becoming clearer. They were dressed in old ranger uniforms, their faces pale and eyes hollow. We realized with a shock that these were the lost rangers, the ones mentioned in the logbook. "We need to leave," Sarah said urgently. "Now." We grabbed our gear and began to pack up, but the figures moved faster, closing in around us. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as they reached out to us with spectral hands. I felt a cold touch on my shoulder and turned to see one of the ghostly rangers standing right behind me, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Help us," he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. Panic set in, and we bolted, running blindly through the fog. The whispers followed, the ghostly figures gliding effortlessly through the trees. We stumbled and fell, our hearts pounding with terror. Just as I thought we were lost, we broke through the fog and found ourselves on a familiar trail. We didn't stop running until we reached the main camp, gasping for breath and drenched in sweat. We reported what had happened, but our colleagues were skeptical. They chalked it up to fatigue and the eerie atmosphere of the forest. But we knew what we had seen. Determined to uncover the truth, we returned to the abandoned ranger station with a larger team. The next day, as we approached, the fog lifted, revealing the station in a new light. We scoured the area, searching for any clues about the lost patrol. In the basement, we found an old, locked chest. Inside were personal belongings, including journals and photographs of the missing rangers. The journals detailed their final days, the growing sense of dread, and the strange occurrences that plagued them. They wrote of the whispers, the ghostly figures, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Their last entries were desperate pleas for help, but none had ever come. With this new evidence, the park authorities launched a formal investigation. They uncovered records of a severe storm that had struck the area at the time of the patrol's disappearance, likely leading to their deaths. A memorial was erected in their honor, and the abandoned station was restored as a historical site. To this day, the northern sector remains a place of mystery and sorrow. The whispers have ceased, and the ghostly figures no longer appear, but the memory of the lost patrol lingers. Visitors often report feeling an eerie presence, a reminder of the rangers who lost their lives protecting the forest. For me, the experience was a stark reminder of the dangers we face as rangers. We protect the park and its visitors, but sometimes, the forest holds secrets that even we cannot explain. The lost patrol of Granite Peak National Park may be gone, but their spirits will always be a part of this land. A testament to their sacrifice and the bond between rangers and the wild. When I first took the job as a park ranger at Blackwood Forest, I never imagined it would lead me to the edge of my sanity. My name is Nathaniel, and for the past 5 years, I've dedicated my life to preserving the natural beauty of this remote wilderness. Blackwood is known for its dense canopy, ancient trees, and a sense of untouched purity. But it's also notorious for its unsettling stories of disappearances, strange sightings, and of a dark presence lurking within. One chilly autumn whispers day, I was assigned to check on an area of the forest that had been closed off for several years. There had been reports of strange noises and sightings of shadowy figures by hikers who had ventured too close. My colleague, Emma, a seasoned ranger with a knack for solving mysteries, volunteered to join me. We set out early in the morning, the mist still clinging to the ground and the sun barely breaking through the dense foliage. As we made our way deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped us. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. We followed an overgrown trail that led to an old cabin, long abandoned and reclaimed by nature. According to park records, the cabin had once belonged to a reclusive hunter named Tobias, who vanished without a trace over 20 years ago. The cabin was in a state of disrepair, its roof partially collapsed and the wooden walls covered in moss. Emma and I carefully made our way inside, the floorboards creaking under our weight. The interior was dark and musty, filled with old hunting gear and faded photographs. As we searched the cabin, I found a journal tucked away in a drawer, its pages yellowed with age. The journal belonged to Tobias, and its entries were a chilling account of his final days. He wrote of hearing voices in the night, seeing shadowy figures lurking in the trees, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. His last entry was a frantic plea for help, describing a shadow with eyes like burning embers that had been stalking him. A sense of unease settled over us as we read the journal. We decided to investigate the area around the cabin, hoping to find some explanation for Tobias's experiences. As we stepped outside, the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long, ominous shadows. We followed a narrow path that led deeper into the woods, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air grew colder, and the silence was broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Suddenly, we heard a faint, whispering voice carried on the wind. It was barely audible, but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. I nodded, gripping my flashlight tighter. "Stay close," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We continued down the path, the whispering growing louder and more distinct. It seemed to be calling our names, urging us to follow. As we rounded a bend, we saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and humanoid, but its features were indistinct, as if it were made of darkness itself. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached the figure. It didn't move, but its eyes glowed with an eerie red light. Emma and I exchanged a glance, unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. "We need to follow it," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I hesitated, but nodded. We followed the figure through the forest, our flashlights barely illuminating the path ahead. The whispering grew louder, filling the air with an otherworldly chorus. Just as I thought we had lost it, we emerged into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large, ancient tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted. The shadowy figure was nowhere to be seen, but the whispering continued, emanating from the tree itself. As we approached, I noticed a strange symbol carved into the bark, a circle with intersecting lines, like a spider's web. Emma reached out to touch the symbol, and the whispering abruptly stopped. The air grew still, and an overwhelming sense of calm washed over me. But just as quickly, the silence was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. We turned to see the shadowy figure reappearing at the edge of the clearing, its eyes blazing with fury. "We need to get out of here," I said, grabbing Emma's arm. We ran back through the forest, the figure chasing us, its whispers turning into guttural growls. My legs burned with effort, and my breath came in ragged gasps. Just as we neared the cabin, the figure stopped, retreating into the shadows. We burst into the cabin, slamming the door behind us. My heart raced, and sweat drenched my shirt. Emma and I leaned against the door, trying to catch our breath. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. "But we need to figure it out." We spent the next few hours researching the symbol we had seen on the tree. It turned out to be an ancient protective sigil, used by indigenous tribes to ward off evil spirits. Tobias had likely carved it into the tree in a desperate attempt to protect himself from the shadowy figure. Determined to put an end to the terror, Emma and I gathered supplies and returned to the clearing. The next day, we carefully retraced the symbol on the tree, hoping to strengthen its power. As we worked, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with anticipation. As night fell, we finished our task and stepped back, watching the tree. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the shadowy figure emerged from the trees, its eyes glowing with anger. It approached the tree, but stopped short, unable to cross the boundary of the sigil. The figure let out a bone-chilling wail, its form dissolving into the darkness. The forest grew still, and an overwhelming sense of peace settled over the clearing. We had done it. Its spirit was banished. Emma and I returned to the ranger station, exhausted but relieved. We reported our findings, and the area around the cabin was designated as a protected site. The forest gradually returned to its natural state, the eerie presence lifting. My name is Kevin, and I've been a park ranger at Pine Grove National Forest for the past 3 years. Pine Grove is known for its sprawling landscapes, towering pine trees, and pristine lakes. It's a place where people come to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, to find peace in the embrace of nature. But beneath its tranquil facade, Pine Grove harbors secrets that few are willing to talk about: strange disappearances, eerie sightings, and a presence that seems to watch from the shadows. One summer, the forest was particularly busy with campers and hikers. The weather was perfect, with clear skies and warm temperatures, drawing people from all over. My days were filled with routine patrols, ensuring everyone followed park regulations and stayed safe. One evening, as I was preparing to close up the ranger station, I received a call from a distressed camper. The caller, a woman named Claire, was staying at a campsite near the northern edge of the forest. She sounded terrified, describing how she and her friends had seen a strange figure lurking in the woods around their site. She claimed it had been watching them for hours, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I assured her I would come by to check things out, and set off immediately. The drive to the northern campsite was long, the sun setting and casting an orange glow over the landscape. By the time I arrived, it was dark, and the only light came from the flickering campfire at Claire's site. She and her friends were huddled together, visibly shaken. I introduced myself and asked them to describe what they had seen. Claire pointed toward the trees. It was tall, maybe 7 feet or more. It didn't look human. Its eyes, they were like burning coals. I nodded, trying to reassure them. "I'll take a look around. Stay by the fire and keep close together." I grabbed my flashlight and started toward the tree line, the beam cutting through the darkness. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife absent. I scanned the area, my senses on high alert. After several minutes, I found nothing unusual and returned to the campsite. I didn't see anything, but I'll stay nearby tonight, just in case, I told them. They seemed relieved, though still on edge. I set up a small camp a short distance away, keeping my flashlight and radio within reach. As the night wore on, I kept watch, my eyes scanning the dark forest. It was around midnight when I heard a faint rustling in the trees, followed by the snap of a twig. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it in the direction of the noise. That's when I saw a figure, tall and shadowy, standing just beyond the reach of the light. Its eyes glowed an unnatural red, piercing through the darkness. My heart raced as I took a step forward, trying to get a better look. The figure didn't move, watching me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear gripping me. There was no response. Instead, the figure slowly retreated into the shadows, disappearing from sight. I stood there, flashlight in hand, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to follow, to find out what it was, but another part urged caution. I decided to head back to the campsite and radio for backup. When I returned, Claire and her friends were wide awake, their faces pale. "Did you see it?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "I did," I replied. "I'm calling for backup. We need to get to the bottom of this." I radioed the ranger station, explaining the situation. Within an hour, 2 of my colleagues, Mark and Lisa, arrived. We decided to do a thorough sweep of the area, hoping to find some clues about the mysterious figure. Splitting into pairs, we combed through the forest, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. As Mark and I moved deeper into the woods, we came across a series of strange markings on the tree symbols and shapes carved into the bark. They looked old, as if they had been there for years. We followed the trail of markings, which led us to a small clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in moss and surrounded by more carved symbols. "This is ancient," Mark said, examining the altar. "What do you think it means?" "I'm not sure," I replied, my mind racing. "But I have a feeling it's connected to the figure we saw." Just then, we heard a blood-curdling scream from the direction of the campsite. We ran back as fast as we could, adrenaline pumping through our veins. When we arrived, we found Lisa and Claire's friends standing in a circle, staring at something on the ground. In the center of the circle was Claire, unconscious but unharmed. She had a small, carved wooden figure clutched in her hand, a replica of the stone altar we had just seen. We carried her back to the ranger station, where she slowly regained consciousness. She had no memory of what had happened, only a vague sense of dread. The next morning, we examined the wooden figure more closely. It was intricately carved, depicting the same symbols we had seen on the trees and altar. We showed it to a local historian, who explained that the symbols were part of an ancient protection ritual, meant to ward off evil spirits. Could the figure we saw be an ancient spirit? Mark asked, his voice hushed. It's possible, the historian replied. Many Native American tribes believed in guardian spirits that protected the land. If this spirit feels threatened or disturbed, it might be trying to protect its territory. We decided to perform a cleansing ritual at the stone altar, hoping to appease the spirit. With the historian's guidance, we gathered the necessary materials and returned to the clearing. As we performed the ritual, the air around us grew still, and an overwhelming sense of peace settled over the forest. For the rest of the summer, there were no more sightings of the mysterious figure, and the eerie presence seemed to lift. Claire and her friends returned to the forest, this time enjoying their stay without incident. The symbols and altar were preserved as part of the forest's history, a reminder of the delicate balance between the natural and supernatural. As for me, I continued to patrol Pine Grove, ever vigilant for signs of danger. The forest is a place of beauty and wonder, but it also holds secrets that defy explanation. The Watcher in Pine Grove may still be out there, guarding its domain, and I am grateful for its protection. My name is Laura, and I've been a park ranger at Elk Ridge National Park for nearly a decade. Nestled in the heart of the Rockies, Elk Ridge is renowned for its rugged beauty, sweeping vistas, and diverse wildlife. It's a place that draws adventurers from all walks of life, seeking solace and thrills in equal measure. But for those of us who work here, Elk Ridge holds secrets that are best left undisturbed. It was a chilly autumn evening when I first heard about the strange occurrences near Old Bear Trail. The trail, named after a particularly grumpy bear that used to roam the area, had always been popular with hikers. But recently, visitors had reported eerie sounds, disembodied whispers, and glimpses of a shadowy figure watching from the trees. That night, I was on patrol with my colleague Tom. Tom was a seasoned ranger with a gruff exterior, but a heart of gold. We were making our rounds when we received a call from a group of hikers who sounded frantic. They claimed to have seen something them on the trail. Tom and I exchanged a glance, and without hesitation, we headed toward Old Bear Trail. The sun was setting as we arrived, casting long shadows over the dense forest. The hikers, a group of college students, were visibly shaken. They described seeing a tall, dark figure that seemed to vanish whenever they tried to get a closer look. Tom and I assured them would investigate, and asked them to stay put. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped us. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. We followed the trail, our flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. It wasn't long before we heard Ida's soft whispering, just beyond the edge of the light. "Do you hear that?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my pulse quickening. "It's coming from up ahead." We pressed on, the whispering growing louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from all around us, echoing through the trees. Then, we saw a figure standing in the middle of the trail. It was tall and shadowy, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as we approached. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no response. The figure remained motionless, watching us. I could feel a cold sweat forming on my brow. Tom stepped forward, shining his flashlight directly at the figure. In an instant, it vanished, leaving nothing but the whispering in its wake. "We need to keep moving," Tom said, his tone urgent. We continued down the trail, our senses on high alert. The whispering seemed to follow us, growing louder with each step. As we rounded a bend, we came across an old, abandoned cabin. It was partially hidden by the overgrowth, its wooden walls weathered and covered in moss. "This must be where it's coming from," I said, more to myself than to Tom. We approached the cabin cautiously, our flashlights illuminating the entrance. The door creaked open with a nudge, revealing a dark, musty interior. Inside, the whispering was louder, more distinct. It was as if the very walls were speaking to us. We searched the cabin, finding nothing out of the ordinary, just old furniture, cobwebs, and dust. But the whispering persisted, growing louder and more frantic. In the corner of the main room, we found an old, tattered journal. I picked it up, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. The journal belonged to a man named Samuel, who had lived in the cabin decades ago. His entries were a chilling account of his final days, filled with fear and paranoia. He wrote of seeing shadowy figures, hearing disembodied voices, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. His last entry was a desperate plea for help, describing a dark presence that haunted him day and night. As I read the journal aloud, the whispering grew louder, more urgent. It felt as though the cabin itself was alive, reacting to Samuel's words. Tom and I exchanged a worried glance. "We need to leave," Tom said, his voice strained. "Now." We hurried out of the cabin, the whispering following us into the night. As we made our way back to the trailhead, the sounds gradually faded, replaced by the familiar noises of the forest. The college students were relieved to see us, though they could tell something had shaken us. Over the following days, Tom and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had uncovered something best left undisturbed. We reported our findings to the park supervisor, who decided to close off Old Bear Trail and the surrounding area for further investigation. The cabin was sealed, and warnings were posted to keep visitors away. Despite our efforts, the stories persisted. Hikers continued to report strange sightings and eerie sounds near the trail. Some claimed to see Samuel's figure watching from the shadows, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Others spoke of hearing his whispers, pleading for help. As for me, I still patrol Elk Ridge, ever watchful for signs of danger. The forest is a place of beauty and wonder, but it also holds secrets that defy explanation. The haunting of Elk Ridge serves as a reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved, and some spirits never truly rest. My name is Eric, and I'm a park ranger at Blood Mountain Wilderness in Georgia. The name might sound ominous, but it's named after the reddish soil found in the area. Despite its unsettling name, Blood Mountain is a haven for hikers, campers, and nature enthusiasts, offering breathtaking views and serene landscapes. But, like many places with a long history, it has its share of dark legends and unexplained phenomena. It was late October, and the forest was ablaze with autumn colors. The park was bustling with visitors eager to enjoy the last mild days before winter set in. I was on my usual patrol, checking the trails and campsites, ensuring everyone followed park regulations. The day had been uneventful until I received a call from a group of hikers who had ventured off the beaten path. The hikers, 3 young men from out of state, sounded panicked. They claimed to have found an old, abandoned campsite deep in the woods, far from any marked trails. According to them, the site looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Yet there were fresh signs of something having been there recently. They mentioned finding strange symbols carved into the trees and hearing eerie, disembodied voices. Intrigued and slightly concerned, I told them to stay put and that I would come to meet them. It took me about an hour to reach their location, guided by the GPS coordinates they had provided. The hike was challenging, the terrain rugged and overgrown. As I approached, I could see the worry etched on their faces. "Show me what you found," I said, trying to put them at ease. They led me to a small clearing, where an old, dilapidated tent stood, half collapsed and covered in moss. Surrounding the campsite were trees marked with peculiar symbols, crudely carved into the bark. I recognized some of them as old Native American glyphs, while others were unfamiliar. "We didn't touch anything," one of the hikers, Mike, said. "But we heard voices. It sounded like chanting or whispering." I nodded, examining the symbols. "You did the right thing by calling. Let's take a closer look." As I walked around the campsite, the air grew noticeably colder. A sense of unease settled over me, but I brushed it off as a natural reaction to the creepy surroundings. I inspected the tent, finding nothing unusual inside, just some old camping gear that had long since deteriorated. However, the symbols on the trees were more troubling. They seemed to form a pattern, encircling the clearing. Just then, heard a faint whispering carried on the wind. I turned to the hikers, who were huddled together, their faces pale. "You hear that?" one of them asked, his voice trembling. "I do," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Stay close to me." The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like an old language, one I couldn't understand. The hikers and I stood frozen, listening as the voices seemed to swirl around us. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whispering stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. "We should leave," I said, my voice firm. "Now." We made our way back to the main trail, the sense of dread lingering with us. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Once we reached the safety of the marked trail, I radioed the ranger station and reported the incident. My supervisor, Jim, advised me to head back to the site with backup to investigate further. Later that afternoon, Jim and another ranger, Sarah, joined me, and we returned to the abandoned campsite. The symbols were still there, as was the dilapidated tent. But the atmosphere felt different, heavier, more oppressive. We split up to search the area, looking for any clues that might explain the strange occurrences. Sarah found an old journal buried under some rocks near the edge of the clearing. It was weathered and falling apart, but some of the entries were still legible. The journal belonged to a man named Henry, who had camped here with his family in the early 1960s. His entries spoke of a happy trip that took a dark turn when they discovered the same symbols carved into the trees. According to Henry's journal, the family began experiencing strange phenomena, unexplained noises, eerie lights in the forest, and a constant feeling of being watched. The last entry was chilling. "The voices are getting louder. We need to leave, but something is keeping us here. I fear for our lives." As we read the journal, the whispering started again, louder and more insistent than before. It seemed to be coming from all directions, echoing through the trees. Jim and Sarah looked at me, their faces mirroring my own unease. "We need to get out of here," Jim said, his voice tense. "Now." We hurried back to the trail, the whispering following us until we reached the safety of the ranger station. Over the next few days, we conducted a thorough investigation of the area, consulting with local historians and Native American elders. They told us that the symbols were part of an ancient ritual meant to protect the land from malevolent spirits. However disturbing, the site could have awakened something dark. In light of this, the area around the old campsite was cordoned off, and warnings were posted to keep visitors away. Despite our efforts, the stories persisted. Hikers continued to report strange sightings and eerie sounds near the site. Some claimed to see figures in the shadows, while others spoke of hearing the same disembodied whispers. As for me, I remained vigilant on my patrols, always aware of the mysteries that lie hidden in the depths of Blood Mountain. The wilderness is a place of beauty and wonder, but it also holds secrets that defy explanation. The echoes of Blood Mountain serve as a reminder that some parts of the past should never be disturbed, and some spirits are best left at peace. My name is Eric, and I'm a park ranger at Blood Mountain Wilderness in Georgia. The name might sound ominous, but it's named after the reddish soil found in the area. Despite its unsettling name, Blood Mountain is a haven for hikers, campers, and nature enthusiasts, offering breathtaking views and serene landscapes. But, like many places with a long history, it has its share of dark legends and unexplained phenomena. It was late October, and the forest was ablaze with autumn colors. The park was bustling with visitors eager to enjoy the last mild days before winter set in. I was on my usual patrol, checking the trails and campsites, ensuring everyone followed park regulations. The day had been uneventful until I received a call from a group of hikers who had ventured off the beaten path. The hikers, 3 young men from out of state, sounded panicked. They claimed to have found an old, abandoned campsite deep in the woods, far from any marked trails. According to them, the site looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Yet there were fresh signs of something having been there recently. They mentioned finding strange symbols carved into the trees and hearing eerie, disembodied voices. Intrigued and slightly concerned, I told them to stay put and that I would come to meet them. It took me about an hour to reach their location, guided by the GPS coordinates they had provided. The hike was challenging, the terrain rugged and overgrown. As I approached, I could see the worry etched on their faces. "Show me what you found," I said, trying to put them at ease. They led me to a small clearing, where an old, dilapidated tent stood, half collapsed and covered in moss. Surrounding the campsite were trees marked with peculiar symbols, crudely carved into the bark. I recognized some of them as old Native American glyphs, while others were unfamiliar. "We didn't touch anything," one of the hikers, Mike, said. "But we heard voices. It sounded like chanting or whispering." I nodded, examining the symbols. "You did the right thing by calling. Let's take a closer look." As I walked around the campsite, the air grew noticeably colder. A sense of unease settled over me, but I brushed it off as a natural reaction to the creepy surroundings. I inspected the tent, finding nothing unusual inside it, just some old camping gear that had long since deteriorated. However, the symbols on the trees were more troubling. They seemed to form a pattern, encircling the clearing. Just then, heard a faint whispering carried on the wind. I turned to the hikers, who were huddled together, their faces pale. "You hear that?" one of them asked, his voice trembling. "I do," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Stay close to me." The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like an old language, one I couldn't understand. The hikers and I stood frozen, listening as the voices seemed to swirl around us. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whispering stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. "We should leave," I said, my voice firm. "Now." We made our way back to the main trail, the sense of dread lingering with us. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Once we reached the safety of the marked trail, I radioed the ranger station and reported the incident. My supervisor, Jim, advised me to head back to the site with backup to investigate further. Later that afternoon, Jim and another ranger, Sarah, joined me, and we returned to the abandoned campsite. The symbols were still there, as was the dilapidated tent. But the atmosphere felt different, heavier, more oppressive. We split up to search the area, looking for any clues that might explain the strange occurrences. Sarah found an old journal buried under some rocks near the edge of the clearing. It was weathered and falling apart, but some of the entries were still legible. The journal belonged to a man named Henry, who had camped here with his family in the early 1960s. His entries spoke of a happy trip that took a dark turn when they discovered the same symbols carved into the trees. According to Henry's journal, the family began experiencing strange phenomena, unexplained noises, eerie lights in the forest, and a constant feeling of being watched. The last entry was chilling. "The voices are getting louder. We need to leave, but something is keeping us here. I fear for our lives." As we read the journal, the whispering started again, louder and more insistent than before. It seemed to be coming from all directions, echoing through the trees. Jim and Sarah looked at me, their faces mirroring my own unease. "We need to get out of here," Jim said, his voice tense. "Now." We hurried back to the trail, the whispering following us until we reached the safety of the ranger station. Over the next few days, we conducted a thorough investigation of the area, consulting with local historians and Native American elders. They told us that the symbols were part of an ancient ritual meant to protect the land from malevolent spirits. However disturbing, the site could have awakened something dark. In light of this, the area around the old campsite was cordoned off, and warnings were posted to keep visitors away. Despite our efforts, the stories persisted. Hikers continued to report strange sightings and eerie sounds near the site. Some claimed to see figures in the shadows, while others spoke of hearing the same disembodied whispers. As for me, I remained vigilant on my patrols, always aware of the mysteries that lie hidden in the depths of Blood Mountain. The wilderness is a place of beauty and wonder, but it also holds secrets that defy explanation. The echoes of Blood Mountain serve as a reminder that some parts of the past should never be disturbed, and some spirits are best left at peace. This time, she turned to face me. Her eyes were hollow, filled with an ancient sadness that seemed to penetrate my very soul. She raised a hand, pointing towards the stream. I stepped closer, my breath visible in the cold air, and looked down. There, beneath the ice, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A human skeleton, partially buried in the silt. The bones were old, covered in algae and debris, but unmistakable. I looked back at the apparition, her eyes pleading with me. "You want me to help you?" I asked softly. She nodded slowly, then began to fade, her form dissolving into the mist. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I had seen. The sadness in her eyes, the desperation, it was clear. She wanted her story to be known, her remains to be found. I radioed Lisa and informed her of my discovery. She was skeptical at first, but the urgency in my voice convinced her to come out and see for herself. Together, we returned to the stream and began the painstaking task of recovering the remains. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the ghostly figure was still there, silently guiding us. It took several hours, but we finally managed to retrieve the skeleton. We contacted the local authorities, and they sent a forensic team to examine the remains. The team concluded that the bones belonged to a young woman who had likely died decades ago. There were no signs of foul play, but the exact cause of death remained a mystery. The story of the ghostly woman and the discovery of her remains quickly spread, attracting media attention and curious onlookers. The local historical society began researching old records, hoping to identify the woman and piece together her story. They found mentions of a young woman who had gone missing in the area back in the early 1900s, but no conclusive evidence to confirm her identity. Despite the lack of answers, I felt a sense of closure, knowing that we had helped bring her story to light. The apparition of Devil's Hollow hasn't been seen since, and the area has returned to its quiet, undisturbed state. But the memory of that ghostly figure, her sorrowful eyes and haunting wail, will stay with me forever. The forest is a place of beauty and mystery, where the past and present often intersect in unexpected ways. As a ranger, I've learned to respect the land and the secrets it holds. Devil's Hollow serves as a reminder that some spirits are bound to the earth, waiting for someone to hear their story and set them free. My name is Sam, and I've been a forest ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for over 15 years. Devil's Hollow, a secluded section of the forest, has always been a place of intrigue and mystery. The name itself is enough to keep most visitors at bay, but it also attracts thrill seekers and paranormal enthusiasts hoping to uncover its secrets. Despite its dark reputation, Devil's Hollow is a beautiful, untouched part of the forest, lush, dense, and eerily quiet. It was a cold winter evening when I first heard about the strange happenings in Devil's Hollow. A group of campers, seasoned outdoorsmen, had reported seeing a ghostly figure near their campsite. They described it as a pale, translucent apparition that appeared to be a woman, drifting silently among the trees. I've heard my share of ghost stories over the years, but something about this one struck a chord with me. Maybe it was the genuine fear in their voices or the detailed descriptions they provided. The next morning, I decided to investigate. I packed my gear, informed my colleague Lisa of my plans, and set off towards Devil's Hollow. The forest was quiet, the snow crunching underfoot as I made my way deeper into the woods. The air was crisp, and the silence was almost oppressive. As I neared the area where the campers had their encounter, I felt a sudden chill, like an icy hand gripping my spine. The campsite was empty, the remains of a fire pit the only indication that anyone had been there. I examined the area, looking for any signs of what the campers might have seen. There were no footprints in the snow, no broken branch of snow thing to suggest a disturbance. I was beginning to think it was just a case of overactive imaginations when I heard a soft, mournful wail carried on the wind. I turned, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. There, among the trees, I saw here a ghostly figure, just as the campers had described. She was pale and ethereal, her long hair flowing as if caught in an unseen breeze. She moved slowly, almost gliding, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity, rooted to the spot as I watched her. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. She continued her slow, mournful procession, disappearing behind a copse of trees. I hesitated for a moment before following, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to know where which was. As I followed her trail, the forest grew darker, the trees closing in around me. The wailing grew louder, more plaintive. It was a sound that tugged at the heart, filled with sorrow and despair. I rounded a bend and saw her again, standing by a frozen stream, her gaze fixed on the water. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My name is Rachel, and I've been a forest ranger in the Pacific Northwest for almost 10 years. The dense, sprawling forests here are a sanctuary for wildlife and a magnet for hikers and campers seeking solitude and adventure. One area, in particular, Pine Grove, has always been a favorite of mine. The towering pines, tranquil streams, and the sheer sense of peace it offers are unmatched. However, like many places in the wilderness, Pine Grove has its share of secrets and stories that are far from peaceful." It was early spring, and the forest was beginning to wake from its winter slumber. The days were getting longer, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of pine and earth. I was on my usual patrol, checking the trails and campsites, ensuring everything was in order. It was a routine day until I came across an old, weathered sign half buried in the underbrush. The sign read, "Beware the Whispering Pines." It heard the legend of the Whispering Pines before a local folktale about a group of loggers who vanished without a trace over a century ago. According to the story, their spirits still haunt the forest, their whispers carried by the wind through the trees. Most people dismissed it as just a spooky tale to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. But the sudden appearance of the sign intrigued me. That evening, back at the ranger station, I mentioned the sign to my colleague, Mark. He shrugged it off, saying it was probably a prank by some teenagers. But something about it gnawed at me. I decided to do some digging, looking through old records and historical documents. I found a few mentions of the loggers' disappearance, but nothing concrete. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The next day, I returned to the spot where it found the sign. I followed a faint, overgrown trail that led deeper into the forest, hoping to find some clue about the loggers or the origins of the legend. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of the forest bird song, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. As I walked, I began to hear faint whispers, barely audible at first, but growing louder with each step. It sounded like a group of people speaking in hushed tones, their voices mingling with the rustling of the pine needles. I stopped, straining to hear the words, but they were indistinct, almost like a distant echo. I continued along the trail, the whispers growing louder and more insistent. I could feel a chill in the air, despite the mild spring weather. The trail led me to a small clearing, where I found an old, abandoned logging camp. The cabins were dilapidated, their roofs caved in, and the tools left to rust. It was as if the loggers had left in a hurry, leaving everything behind. In the center of the clearing stood a massive pine tree, its trunk scarred with deep, old cuts from an axe. The whispers seemed to emanate from the tree itself, swirling around me like a ghostly wind. I approached the tree, heart pounding, and placed my hand on the rough bark. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. I could make out fragments of sentences, words of warning and despair. Beware, the forest, trapped, forever. I pulled my hand away, the whispers fading into the background noise of the forest. I knew I had to find out more about what had happened here. I spent the next few days researching, talking to locals, and piecing together the story. The loggers, it seemed, had angered something in the forest, whether it was a spirit, an ancient curse, or the forest itself. No one knew for sure. But their disappearance was real, and their spirits were said to be bound to the Whispering Pines. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to the clearing with Mark. We brought along equipment to document any unusual phenomena: cameras, audio recorders, and thermal sensors. As we set up, the whispers started again, faint but unmistakable. Mark looked at me, his skepticism replaced by a mix of fear and curiosity. As night fell, the forest grew even more silent, the whispers becoming clearer and more distinct. We listened as they told their story, a tale of greed, anger, and a desperate plea for release. The loggers had desecrated a sacred grove, angering the spirits that dwelled within. Their punishment was to remain trapped in the forest, their voices a constant reminder of their transgression. We spent hours in the clearing, recording the whispers and trying to communicate with the spirits. At one point, Mark placed his hand on the scarred pine tree, and the whispers grew almost deafening. He jerked his hand away, eyes wide with shock. "I could feel them," he said, his voice trembling. "They're trapped. They're begging for help." It became clear that the spirits wanted something from us, a way to lift the curse and set them free. We decided to perform a simple ritual of apology and respect, hoping it would be enough. We lit a small fire, offered some of our provisions, and spoke words of contrition and peace. As the fire crackled, the whispers grew softer, more harmonious. It was as if the spirits were finally at peace. The air around us warmed, and the oppressive feeling lifted. We stayed in the clearing until dawn, the whispers fading with the rising sun. When we returned to the ranger station, we reviewed the recordings. The audio captured the whispers clearly, an eerie testament to the legend of the Whispering Pines. We shared our findings with the local historical society, and they agreed to mark the site as a place of historical significance and respect. The legend of the Whispering Pines is now more than just a spooky tale. It's a reminder of the power of nature and the importance of respecting the land and its history. As a ranger, I've always known that the forest holds many secrets, some darker than others. But the experience in Pine Grove taught me that some spirits just need to be heard and understood, their stories finally laid to rest. And so, the Whispering Pines stand as a silent sentinel, a reminder of the past, and a guardian of the future, their voices now a part of the forest's eternal song. My name is Jack, and I've been a park ranger in the dense forests of the Rocky Mountains for nearly a decade. My job has brought me face to face with all sorts of wildlife and natural beauty, but it has also exposed me to the darker side of the wilderness. One particular area, known as Blackwood, has a reputation that precedes it. Stories of people going missing, strange lights, and eerie sounds are all too common. Most of my colleagues avoid it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a crisp autumn day when I decided to venture into Blackwood for my routine patrol. The forest was alive with the vibrant colors of fall, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and decaying leaves. As I entered the woods, the canopy of trees seemed to close in around me, casting long shadows that danced with the movement of the wind. The trail was faint, barely visible under the fallen leaves, but I pressed on, determined to complete my patrol. About an hour into my hike, I reached a clearing with an old, abandoned cabin in the center. It was weathered and overgrown, with ivy creeping up its walls and the roof caving in at places. I had heard rumors about this cabana place where hunters used to stay before it was abandoned under mysterious circumstances. I decided to take a closer look. As I approached the cabin, I noticed something strange. The air around it felt colder, and there was an eerie stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I reached for my radio to check in with the station, but all I got was static. Figuring it was just a dead zone, continued my investigation. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was even more unsettling. The walls were covered in old, faded photographs of the forest, and the floor was littered with remnants of past visitors' rusty cans, broken furniture, and scattered papers. One of the papers caught my eye. It was an old journal, the pages yellowed with age. I picked it up and began to read. The journal belonged to a park ranger named Tom, who had been assigned to Blackwood over 30 years ago. His entries detailed his daily patrols, the wildlife he encountered, and strange occurrences that he couldn't explain. The final entry was what chilled me to the bone. October 15, 1987. Something is wrong in Blackwood. The forest feels alive, watching me. I hear whispers at night, voices I can't understand. Today, I saw a figure in the woods, a shadow that moved without sound. I'm going to find out what it is. If I don't make it back, let this be a warning: stay away from Blackwood. Tom had never returned from his patrol, and his disappearance was one of the many unsolved mysteries of Blackwood. As I read his words, I felt a cold draft sweep through the cabin, and the whispers he mentioned seemed to echo in my ears. I quickly left the cabin, the journal clutched in my hand. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, ominous shadows through the trees. I decided to head back to the station, but as I retraced my steps, I realized the forest had changed. The trail I had followed was gone, swallowed by the underbrush. I was lost. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from all directions, a chorus of voices blending into a haunting melody. I picked up my pace, trying to find any landmark that looked familiar, but the forest was unrecognizable. The trees seemed to shift and move, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. In my desperation, I stumbled upon an old, forgotten cemetery, overgrown and hidden deep within the woods. The headstones were weathered and cracked, their inscriptions barely legible. As I walked among them, I noticed one that stood out. It was newer than the others and bore a name I recognized. My heart raced as I knelt to read the inscription. Tom Rickardson, Park Ranger. Lost in Blackwood, October 15, 1987. May he find peace in the forest he loved. The whispers grew deafening, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, and there, standing at the edge of the cemetery, was a figure tall, shadowy, and indistinct. It moved silently towards me, and as it approached, I realized it was not alone. More figures emerged from the trees, surrounding me. They were the lost souls of Blackwood, the people who had vanished over the years. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The figures closed in, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes hollow. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying at the edge of the forest, just outside Blackwood. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the trees. I was disoriented, but alive. The journal was still in my hand, its pages fluttering in the breeze. I got to my feet and made my way back to the station, my mind racing with what had happened. I reported my experience to my superiors, but they were skeptical. The journal, however, was undeniable proof of Tom's existence and his warnings. An investigation was launched, but no concrete evidence of the supernatural was found. Blackwood was deemed a dangerous area, and the public was warned to stay away. To this day, I can't explain what happened in Blackwood. The forest remains an enigma, its secrets hidden among the trees. The whispers still haunt my dreams, a reminder of the vanishing patrol and the lost souls who call Blackwood home. As a park ranger, I've learned to respect the forest and its mysteries, knowing that some things are better left unexplored. Blackwood stands as a testament to the unknown, a place where the past and present intertwine, and where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs. The Vanishing Patrol is just one of many stories that the forest holds. A dark chapter in the history of a place that will forever remain shrouded in mystery. My name is Tom, and I've been a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for nearly 15 years. The rugged terrain and dense forests have always been my sanctuary, a place where I felt at peace. But there is one area, always Avidita remote valley known as Echo Valley. The locals say it's haunted, cursed by the spirits of those who died there. Most dismiss it as folklore, but I've heard enough strange stories to be wary. One summer, a series of mysterious disappearances brought Echo Valley back into the spotlight. 3 hikers vanished without a trace, their last known location deep within the valley. The authorities conducted a search but found nothing. The case went cold, and the valley was officially closed to the public. Despite the warnings, I felt compelled to investigate. Maybe it was my sense of duty or sheer curiosity, but I needed to know what happened to those hikers. I set out early one morning, equipped with a map, a flashlight, and my trusty old compass. The trail leading to Echo Valley was overgrown, rarely used by anyone in recent years. As I made my way through the dense underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. After a few hours of hiking, I reached the entrance to the valley. The trees here were older, their gnarled branches twisting into unnatural shapes. The air felt thick and heavy, as if the valley itself was alive. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined to uncover the truth. The path wound through the valley, leading me past ancient rock formations and dense thickets. I followed the trail markers, but they became increasingly sporadic and difficult to see. It was as if the valley was trying to disorient me, to keep me from reaching its heart. I pressed on, relying on my map and compass to guide me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley floor, I stumbled upon an old campsite. It was abandoned, but the remnants of a campfire and scattered gear suggested it hadn't been long since someone was here. I searched the area and found a backpack containing a journal. The cover was worn, and the pages were filled with entries detailing the hiker's journey. The final entry sent a chill down my spine. July 12. We've been hearing voices, whispers in the night. There's something out here, watching us. We can't find our way out. The compass spins in circles, and the map makes no sense. We're trapped. If anyone finds this, please tell our families we love them. I knew I had to leave the valley before nightfall, but as I turned to go, I heard a faintest whisper carried on the wind. It was indistinct, almost like an echo. I shone my flashlight around the campsite, searching for the source, but there was nothing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold hand brush against my arm. Panic set in as I realized I was no longer alone. Shadows moved among the trees, dark shapes that seemed to melt into the forest. I grabbed the journal and began to run, following the trail as best as I could. The whispers followed me, echoing through the valley like a chorus of lost souls. I ran until I reached a small clearing, breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers were all around me now, forming words I could barely understand. They spoke of betrayal, of pain, of a curse that bound them to the valley. I realized then that the spirits of those who had perished here were trapped, unable to move on. Determined to help, I shouted into the darkness, offering my apologies for whatever wrongs had been done to them. I promised to tell their stories, to remember their names. The whispers seemed to quiet for a moment, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. As I made my way out of the valley, the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the forest. The whispers faded, replaced by the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. I emerged from the trees, exhausted, but relieved. I had survived Echo Valley, but I knew the spirits still lingered, waiting for someone to finally set them free. Back at the ranger station, I handed over the journal to the authorities and recounted my experience. They were skeptical, but agreed to reopen the investigation into the disappearances. I knew it was a long shot, but I hoped my encounter would bring some closure to the families of the missing hikers. Echo Valley remains a forbidden place, a reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of the forest. I've never returned, but I often think about the voices I heard and the souls trapped in that cursed valley. As a park ranger, I've learned to respect the land and its secrets, knowing that some stories are meant to be left untold. The echoes in the valley continue to haunt me, a testament to the power of the past and the enduring presence of those who came before. Their voices are a part of the forest now, a whisper on the wind that reminds us of the delicate balance between life and death, and the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. My name is Sarah, and I've been a park ranger at Blue Ridge Park for over 7 years. The park is a sprawling expanse of mountains, rivers, and dense forests, a haven for wildlife and nature enthusiasts alike. I've always loved the serenity and beauty of the park, but there's one area that has always given me an uneasy feeling: an isolated section known as Whispering Pines. Whispering Pines is a dense forest located on the park's northern edge. It earned its name from the eerie sound the wind makes as it passes through the tall pine trees. Locals often tell tales of strange lights and unexplained disappearances, but these stories are typically dismissed as folklore. I had never paid much attention to them until one cold winter evening changed everything. I was scheduled for a routine night patrol through Whispering Pines. The park had received reports of unusual activity in the area, lights flickering through the trees and strange sounds. Most of my colleagues avoided the place, but I took the assignment, partly out of curiosity and partly to prove to myself that there was nothing to fear. I set out just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The air was frigid, and my breath formed clouds in front of me as I walked. The path was barely visible under the blanket of snow, but I knew the way well. The forest was silent, save for the crunch of my boots and the occasional rustle of branches overhead. About an hour into my patrol, I saw a faint, flickering light deep within the trees. At first, I thought it might be a camper or a lost hiker, but as I approached, the light moved further away, as if leading me deeper into the forest. I followed, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The light led me to a small clearing, where an old, abandoned cabin stood. The structure was dilapidated, with broken windows and a sagging roof. The light disappeared as I approached, leaving me standing in the eerie glow of my flashlight. The cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Despite my apprehension, I decided to investigate. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a dusty, cobweb-filled interior. The air was stale, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. As I swept my flashlight around the room, I noticed old furniture, a rusted stove, and an ancient, moldy mattress in the corner. On a small table near the window, I found a weathered journal. The cover was cracked and the pages yellowed with age. I carefully opened it, revealing the handwriting of someone named Abigail. Her entries detailed her life in the cabin, living in isolation with her husband Thomas. The final entry caught my attention. February 3, 1942. The lights are back. Thomas went to investigate but hasn't returned. I'm scared. The forest feels alive, watching me. If anyone finds this, please know that we loved each other dearly. The light is outside again. I'm going to look for Thomas. As I read her words, I heard a faint whisper behind me, followed by a soft, flickering light illuminating the cabin. My heart pounded as I turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was a shadowy figure. It was a man, tall and thin, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. He didn't move or speak, just stood there watching. Fear gripped me, but I forced myself to speak. "Thomas?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but the light grew brighter, enveloping the cabin in an otherworldly glow. I felt a sudden pull, like an invisible force urging me to leave. I grabbed the journal and backed away, flashlight flickering erratically. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a wave. The light disappeared, and the figure was gone. I ran back to the trail, the whispers echoing in my ears. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees casting long, ghostly shadows in the moonlight. I didn't stop running until I reached the park's main road. Back at the ranger station, reported my experience and handed over Abigail's journal. My colleagues were skeptical, but the journal's existence lent some credibility to my story. An investigation was launched, but like many before it, no definitive answers were found. Whispering Pines was deemed a hazardous area, and access was restricted to park staff only. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind. Abigail and Thomas's story haunted me, their love and their tragic fate echoing through the forest. I began researching the history of the area and discovered that they weren't the only ones to have vanished in Whispering Pines. Over the years, several people had gone missing, all under mysterious circumstances involving the strange lights. Determined to find answers, I returned to Whispering Pines one final time. Equipped with better gear and a renewed sense of purpose, I made my way to the abandoned cabin. The forest was just as silent and foreboding as before, but I was resolute. I needed to know what had happened to Abigail and Thomas, and perhaps find a way to help them find peace. The cabin was exactly as I had left it, but this time, I felt a sense of calm rather than fear. I placed the journal back on the table and spoke aloud, hoping that they could hear me. I told them I understood their pain and that their love would never be forgotten. As I finished speaking, a warm light filled the cabin, and I saw the shadowy figures of Abigail and Thomas standing together, hand in hand. They looked at me with gratitude before slowly fading away, the light disappearing with them. I left the cabin feeling a weight lifted from my shoulders. The whispers were gone, replaced by the peaceful sounds of the forest. Whispering Pines still holds its mysteries, but I believe that Abigail and Thomas have finally found the peace they were seeking. The phantom light remains a testament to their love and the enduring power of the human spirit, even in the face of the unknown. The story of Whispering Pines is one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. A reminder that the past can sometimes reach out to the present, and that even in the darkest places, there can be light. My name is Tom, and I've been a park ranger at Black Ridge National Park for nearly a decade. I love my job, patrolling the trails, ensuring the safety of visitors, and protecting the natural beauty of the park. But the peace and tranquility of Black Ridge can sometimes be deceiving. The park holds secrets, and some of those secrets are dark and dangerous. It was late autumn, and the park was preparing for the winter season. The trees were shedding their leaves, covering the ground in a blanket of red and gold. The air was crisp and cool, and the park was quieter than usual, with fewer visitors venturing out in the colder weather. One afternoon received a call about a missing hiker. A young woman named Sarah had gone out for a hike the previous day and hadn't returned. Her family was worried, and a search party was quickly assembled. As the head ranger, it was my responsibility to lead the search and ensure we found her quickly and safely. We started at the trailhead where Sarah had last been seen. The trail wound through dense forest, up steep hills, and across rocky terrain. It was a challenging hike, even for experienced outdoorsmen, and the fading daylight added to the urgency of our search. "Stay together and keep an eye out for any signs of her," I instructed the team. "Footprints, clothing, anything that might help us track her down." We spread out and moved methodically along the trail, calling out Sarah's name and scanning the ground for clues. As we ventured deeper into the forest, a sense of unease began to settle over us. The forest seemed darker and more oppressive, the trees closing in around us. After several hours of searching, we found a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. It matched the description of the clothes Sarah had been wearing. We followed the trail, the sense of unease growing stronger with each step. "Tom, over here," one of the rangers called out. I hurried over and saw what had caught his attention. There were strange markings on the ground, like claw marks, and the underbrush was trampled. It looked like there had been a struggle. What could have done this? Another ranger asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. "But we need to find her quickly." We followed the trail of broken branches and disturbed earth, the forest growing darker and more foreboding. The claw marks continued, leading us to a narrow, overgrown path that wasn't on any of the park's maps. "This path isn't supposed to be here," I said, frowning. "Be careful, we don't know where it leads." We pressed on, the path winding through the dense forest. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over the woods. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot. Suddenly, we heard a faint, high-pitched scream. It was coming from up ahead, deeper in the forest. "That must be Sarah," one of the rangers said, his voice urgent. "We need to hurry." We quickened our pace, the path growing narrower and more treacherous. The scream grew louder, more desperate, and we knew we were getting closer. Finally, we broke through the trees and into a small clearing. There, we saw Sarah, huddled against a tree, her eyes wide with terror. Standing over her was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, with long, bony limbs and sharp claws. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and it let out a guttural snarl as we approached. "Stay back," I shouted, drawing my weapon. "Get away from her." The creature turned towards us, its eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. Then, with a sudden burst of adrenaline, I fired a warning shot into the air. The creature let out a screech and lunged at us. We fired again, this time hitting it squarely in the chest. It stumbled back, snarling and hissing, before turning and disappearing into the forest. We rushed over to Sarah and helped her to her feet. She was shaking and crying, her clothes torn and dirty. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I was going to die." "It's okay, you're safe now," I said, trying to reassure her. "Let's get you out of here." We made our way back to the main trail, keeping a close watch for any sign of the creature. The sense of unease lingered, but we were relieved to have found Sarah alive. Back at the ranger station, we tended to Sarah's injuries and called her family to let them know she was safe. She told us about the creature and how it had stalked her through the forest, its eyes glowing in the darkness. "I don't know what it was," she said, her voice shaky. "But it wasn't human. It was like a nightmare come to life." The experience left us all deeply shaken, and we vowed to increase patrols and keep a closer watch on the park. Black Ridge National Park is a place of breathtaking beauty, but it is also a place of secrets and danger. Some things are best left unexplored, and some stories are best left untold. As a park ranger, I've seen my fair share of strange and unexplained events. But nothing compares to that night in Black Ridge. The forest is a place of mystery and wonder, but it is also a place of darkness and terror. And sometimes, the things that go bump in the night are all too real. My name is Jack, and I've been a park ranger at Redwood Valley for nearly 15 years. I've always loved the forest of towering trees, the crisp air, and the serenity that comes with being surrounded by nature. But sometimes, the forest holds secrets that are better left undiscovered. It was early spring, and the park was just beginning to come alive after the long winter. The first hikers and campers were starting to trickle in, eager to experience the beauty of Redwood Valley. One of my duties was to patrol the more remote areas of the park, ensuring that everything was in order and that no one was in danger. One evening, as the sun began to set, I received a distress call from a group of campers. They were deep in the forest, near an area known as Hollow Glen. The signal was weak and crackling, but I could make out the fear in their voices. "Help us, please," a woman's voice pleaded. "Something's out here with us. We're at the Hollow Glen campsite. Please, hurry." It grabbed my gear and radioed for backup, but the nearest ranger was over an hour away. I had to go alone. As I made my way through the forest, the shadows grew longer, and an eerie stillness settled over the woods. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. I arrived at the Hollow Glen campsite just as darkness fell. The campsite was deserted, the fire still smoldering, and tents scattered around. There was no sign of the campers. I called out, but my voice seemed to vanish into the void. "Hello, is Anio Neher?" No response. I felt a chill run down my spine as I scanned the area. There were signs of a struggle, broken branches, scattered belongings, and footprints leading away from the campsite. I followed the trail, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The trail led me deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around me. The air grew colder, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. I knew I should have waited for backup, but I couldn't leave those campers out here alone. After what felt like an eternity, came across a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and foreboding. The trail of footprints led straight to the front door, which hung open on rusty hinges. I approached cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the inside of the cabin. The interior was a mess: broken furniture, shattered glass, and strange symbols etched into the walls. The air was thick with the smell of decay. "Hello, is anyone in here?" I heard a faint sound, like a whisper, coming from the back of the cabin. I moved slowly, my flashlight revealing more of the disturbing scene. As I reached the back room, I saw theft campers huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "Thank God you're here," one of them said, a young man named David. "We thought we were done for." "What happened?" I asked, helping them to their feet. "We were sitting around the campfire," Sarah, the woman who had made the call, explained. "Then we heard something in the woods. It sounded like whispers, but there was no one there. And then we saw it." "Saw hat, a creature," David said, his voice shaking. "It was tall, with long limbs and glowing eyes. It chased us through the forest. We managed to lose it, but we ended up here. We need to get out of here," I said, my own fear mounting. "Stay close and keep quiet." We left the cabin, the darkness pressing in on us from all sides. The forest seemed to come alive with strange sounds: rustling leaves, distant whispers, and the occasional snap of a twig. I kept my flashlight trained on the path, my heart pounding in my chest. As we made our way back to the main trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle, every shadow seemed to hide some unseen threat. The campers were silent, their fear palpable. We finally reached the main trail, and I radioed for backup again, this time with a clearer signal. I could hear the relief in the dispatcher's voice as they confirmed that help was on the way. We waited in the darkness, every minute feeling like an hour. Suddenly, the forest erupted with movement. The creature appeared, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, its limbs long and spindly. The campers screamed, and I raised my flashlight, trying to blind it. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. The creature paused, its eyes narrowing. Then, with a blood-curdling screech, it lunged towards us. I fired my flare gun, the bright light and loud noise startling it. The creature recoiled, giving us a precious moment to run. We sprinted down the trail, the creature's howls echoing behind us. Just as we thought we couldn't go any further, we saw the lights of the ranger station ahead. Backup had arrived, and the creature melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the forest. The campers were taken to safety, and I gave my report to the other rangers. We searched the area thoroughly, but there was no sign of the creature. The camper's story was dismissed as a combination of fear and imagination, but I knew better. I had seen it too.